This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam. And I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
People have so much to gain and have such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come of their boards to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader?
Don't remember his name.
You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, Jack.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 227. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we continue our exploration of the British Mandate in Palestine in our series,
I'm
The
starting
Land
to think,
Belongs.
as I was saying, I'm starting to think that we were thinking, okay, we did 12 parts on the Ottoman period. We'll do
11.
12 parts. Yeah, oh, right, we did 11. We'll do 11 parts on the post-Ottoman period up to the Nakba. Starting to wonder if we might go over 11 parts because we're already, I guess, is this going to be the third? Probably.
Yeah.
Although
12, 13, 14. A little shorter, though. These
part,
are a
and
little
we're still
shorter.
kind of like a 1920. Yeah, well, these have been a little bit shorter. I mean, I guess we could fuse them. It's just because we've been doing some, we've been giving some of our recording session time to other things. But we will continue here, and we'll see how it pans out. I mean, it doesn't really matter if it's, longer than if it's not perfectly symmetrical in that way.
I don't think we have to feel like we must.
No, we're not bound
end
to it.
it in 11
No, not at all.
episodes.
No,
and
not in
we're
any way.
we are also talking about pretty much like a 30-ish year period. So
Yeah.
we're getting in deep to a lot of the different facets and kind of covering. So far we've been kind of in like the early 1920s, and I think today we're gonna probably mostly stick in the 1920s, but we're going to shift our focus to some other
I was just saying to you,
like,
I'm not sure. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure if we're going to get to like 1929 today, in sort of, as I was saying last time, like if we're going by like the beats of the conventional historiography of this period, which are often like based on like how the British perceive things as being like, oh, there was this flare up of like Arab sentiment or whatever.
Right.
We probably won't get to those riots, the Wailing Wall riots, this time, but we'll try to reach it for at least next time. But for the time being, speaking of getting into the weeds of like the different aspects, there's two things that I wanted to like get to. Hopefully this time, maybe we'll continue in one of these veins next time. But I definitely wanted to talk about, or at least start talking about, like the Mufti, who, as we talked about last time, like very looms large, definitely like a big feature of sort of Zionist history and narratives around, why it's okay for them to do whatever they want.
Up until today. Like,
which really
Netanyahu has talked about it.
Exactly, yeah. Which really, and what in terms of whatever they want, there's no limit to like the depravity of what these people want, as we are recently seeing, actually, because we're recording this just a day after
the pagers.
Beeper, the epic Beeper attack, which is just so impressive in its
freaking James
intricacy.
Bond, man. Wow.
Well,
yeah,
cool. Not like just totally depraved, totally evil, and like it's kind of like a Bond villain,
like cyberpunk,
something a Bond
murder.
villain would do.
Yeah,
like
it really was. I think this has been the plot in movies before. They're like, I'm gonna put a cell phone chip in everybody's brains, but then I'm a bad guy. So when I press a button, like everyone's brain is gonna explode. Like I think that's been in Hollywood movies over the last 15 years.
It truly is like terrorism by any like stable definition. It's more terroristic than
Yeah.
any act of terrorism I can think about because it just makes everyone think like,
It's a new
oh, is my
frontier.
microwave going to kill me? Like everything becomes like an object of fear and a potential threat.
The Internet of
And
Things that might turn on you at any moment and explode.
yeah,
Yeah, it's pretty it's pretty freaky.
and if that happened, like let's, everyone in Israel is, required to do military service, right? If you live there,
Mhm.
right? So everyone in Israel is a member of the IDF. So let's say that like Hezbollah had done that, in reverse. It
Yeah.
would be the biggest, most incredible act of absolute like soulless evil ever. If they like, we would never hear the end of it. Like
Yeah,
if
no,
anyone had done that to
if
Israel,
like
if like
Al-Qaeda had done
IDF like
that in the
walkie-talkies.
2000s, it would
Can
have
you imagine
just there would
that?
have been martial law
That's
in
like
America.
right after like a time out of like I've been reading these old like Time magazine like 9/11 articles
Oh
because I
yeah.
remember like as a kid reading those
I
and
still
like
have a few.
right
I
after
have some like
9/11.
Newsweeks that I've
Yeah.
kept all the way back since 9/11
Yeah.
of like America under attack and like all these crazy. I think I have the Rolling Stone article issue after 9/11, which is like, yeah, no, they're all very intense
It
and freaked
truly
out. They're all so freaked out. Like,
yeah, and just like but like some of these like crazy a lot of those old articles are about like sort of spinning these scenarios about like what they might do because everyone then
yeah,
thought like there's going to be a 9/11 every week. This is what like
yeah,
we're at war now, and like there's going to be like attacks constantly. And so a lot of it
mhm.
was just kind of like spinning out into these like lurid fantasies of like what these terrorists are going to do to us next,
They're gonna attack
and
malls.
yeah, and that like beeper thing is like something that would be in those magazines, like imagining what Al Qaeda was gonna do.
Uh-huh.
Like what,
Uh-huh.
in his mountain fortress, bin Laden was gonna like perpetrate against the American people.
Yeah.
It would be something like that. Yeah.
No, but the standards are a little different. So this is just an epic bacon intelligence operation.
It's the
I
most
mean,
targeted thing ever. It's like completely not. Like literally, I think that like the most
killed an
targeted thing
8-year-old.
ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, is probably just like I don't know, like line infantry, like just shooting each other. Like that's more targeted. Definitely, it's not the most
Right.
targeted thing in history. Yeah, like an 8-year-old girl died. These are just random like phones that blow up, like when people might be in public, like around civilians.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like
It's
insane.
terror. It's terrorism,
It's the
basically.
like
It is. Like,
again, like as we've said many times, like terrorism is not like something that can really have like an objective definition. And if
right,
you
right.
did give it an objective definition, then this would absolutely qualify. But no one uses it in that way. It's just like whatever like Muslims do. And then
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and
I
some
guess
others,
no, it's true. It's true.
yeah.
Really not the best term, but also, like directly state sponsored terrorism in the sense of, a very organized intelligence apparatus. I think as of this recording, it seems like they sort of accomplished this through a country that we had talked about pretty recently, Hungary, right? And Contra 8. I don't know if people will probably maybe have heard that by the time they hear this, but we were talking about Semyon Mogilevich's operations in Hungary in the early 1990s, setting up all these international mafia fronts from there. And what was it, Magnex? Like there are all these military manufacturing concerns that Mogilevich either bought outright or like used as shell companies and then like went to Canada and like, there was all that kind of like international fraud type of shit. And so I guess it didn't surprise me too much to see that like some, I guess, Mossad outfit set up like a fake shell company to like license, to like quote unquote manufacture beepers, and then, use that basically to like infiltrate a supply chain and then put all these bombs in them, etc. And then of course, Taiwanese beepers, that's a whole nother thing. It's got contra wackel kind of energy a little bit. But
Yeah,
I mean, this is high tech terrorism, if we want to
yeah.
call it that.
I posted
Um,
this in the grotto, but for those who didn't get a chance to see it, like we will get to the historical substances episode in a moment, but I did want to
yeah.
read from this insane article called Living with Terror: How to Keep a Sense of Control. This was published on October 8th, 2001 by
Hmm.
Lisa Bayer, the former
Okay.
Jerusalem bureau chief at Time magazine.
Oh.
And she talked okay. I'll just read the whole thing because it's actually pretty short,
Okay.
as articles in this magazine tend to be. How do you live with terrorism? For Israeli civilians who have been coping with the fear of knifings, shootings, and bombings for the entire half century of their nation's existence, it's a bit like living in a village next to a river that floods in the spring. You adjust, literally mowing the lawn. But
Yeah.
anyway, so there you go.
They're
In the
just
nine
part of
years
the
I lived,
topography. They're not
yeah.
people.
In the 9 years I lived in Jerusalem, I was struck by how obsessively Israelis use their cell phones, relaying to spouses and friends their every move throughout the day. I came to realize they were tenaciously holding on to the people in their lives, keeping track of precisely where everyone was, just in case. Living with terror on a full-time basis, you develop protocols. Not necessarily the best choice of word, but okay. when, when an attack occurs, you call the people you love in the city where it happened. You ask quickly, is everyone accounted for? The answers are economical too, so the phone lines don't jam. You avoid targets that appeal to bombers, like shopping malls and cinemas, especially if your kids are with you. Closed areas are more dangerous than open ones because they magnify the power of explosives. After public buses started blowing up, I steered clear of them in traffic. I drove with my doors locked after terrorists, escaping from a bus they had tried to hijack, commandeered a woman's car. Israeli soldiers shot them and her dead. I like how that's just like, all right, yeah, and the Israeli
Cannibal
soldiers just
Directive.
immediately shot
Yeah.
her too. Yeah, as we're also finding out like the extent of like the like we all kind of knew this, like everyone who like had a sort of sober mind about these things, but there
Right.
was also just like breathless denials that Israel killed any of its own people on October 7th, for instance.
At the
But
like especially
now,
the Nova Festival
yeah,
where
now
it
the Israeli media is kind of like starting to be like, well, yeah, we just like relentlessly like blew the hell out of that place.
Mhm.
Like so yeah,
Yep.
but
Yep. And
um
now they're letting all the
and
hostages
if you
like
know
die.
anything
Like
about it, like if you know anything about Israel, like it's obvious that was the case.
Mhm.
Anyway, so
Yeah.
but like you can tell from this article alone like that would happen. So yeah, she goes on. You become nosy and suspicious. There is no such thing in Israel as an unattended package. If someone leaves a bag behind, within minutes a citizen alerts the police, who clear the area until the bomb squad can send in a robot to blow it up. This is such a common scene in Israeli cities it doesn't even draw a crowd. Israelis tend to be acutely aware of who is around them. They search faces and notice odd behavior. For instance, a man wearing a heavy jacket in summertime. That kind of vigilance is paid off on occasion, thwarting would-be attackers or panicking them into blowing themselves up prematurely. All right. You get used to the martial atmosphere. Like Americans, Israelis own lots of guns, and they pack them more openly. Israel may be the only country where, unless you look like a Palestinian, you can enter a bank with a machine gun. In Israeli cities, soldiers are everywhere. In recent weeks, New Yorkers were astonished to see F-16s flying overhead. In Israel, warplanes are no more unusual in the sky than hawks. Police cars in Israel keep their blue lights flashing at all times as a deterrent to would-be attackers. When I first arrived, it unnerved me. Soon it was just the way things were. You practice ethnic profiling. After a wave of terrorist attacks, Israelis fire their Palestinian gardeners. They pressure the bus company to get rid of the Arab who drives their kids to school.
Oh
They
my God.
discriminate blatantly against Arabs in particular and non-Jews in general. Before boarding a private plane I had hired, I was asked by a pilot, "You are a Jew, right?" All of which, of course, does very little to slow down the attackers, as the mounting casualties of terrorism in Israel attest. But the point is to reclaim a sense of control in a situation that is far beyond the control of individual citizens, and that is essential. Terrorists want to frighten us, and we are scared, but panic and paralysis, those we can deny them. By Lisa Bayer. I find this
Yeah.
article like morbidly fascinating because in the end she like admits that like first of all she like sort of touts like ethnic profiling and just like being racist and like forcing people out of their jobs for no reason as like a good thing, but not because it prevents terrorism, because it
Yeah, it
makes
doesn't
people feel better.
safer.
Yeah.
She's describing a lot of security theater that Americans would become somewhat acquainted with, in the
Yeah.
in the months and years after 9/11 of
Yes.
yeah, just like kind of more of a militarized police presence everywhere and checkpoint, more checkpoint security, this and that, and a lot of things that really are like more for show, but she is describing like a police state
Yeah.
essentially.
It reminds me of I'm sure you never watched like all the West Wing or like, but maybe you've seen this episode. The one that was like right after 9/11, and it starts off with
Oh
the cast
no.
members being like, "We present to you a play." It
Oh
doesn't
my
fit
god.
into the normal West Wing canon, and the premise is like, there's some kind of like security situation at the White House, and like all your favorite West Wing cast members have to like talk to a group of high school students who are questioning like, why do they hate our freedom or
Oh my
whatever, and
god.
like it's like the worst thing you've ever seen. But like I remember there's this one part where like one of these like, bright-eyed kids who just wants to understand what's going on is like, but what do you call a society like where people are constantly under siege and attack and we used to worry about being targeted by terrorism? And like what's his name? Like Richard Schiff or whatever,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the bald guy like
The egghead,
soberly
yeah.
like looks in the camera and is like,
Israel.
Israel. Yeah.
Well,
It's just like give me a break.
I mean, didn't
Um
Netanyahu did say at some point in the future that like, oh yeah, 9/11 was like great for like
yeah,
U.S.
exactly.
Israeli
Yeah.
relations, like,
Hmm.
really brought us closer together.
He said that the
And
day after, right? Like that was like the
he
day
might have.
after. Yeah.
And I
Uh,
mean, yep, it sure did in certain ways.
yeah, he was like, it was great. Like, oh, I mean, not great, like in terms of all the people that died, but it's great
That's
because you
right.
finally understand like what,
He was a
we
dancing
go through.
Israeli a little. He was
He
dancing on the
was,
inside a little bit.
yeah, a lot. I feel like that was like a widespread sentiment actually, where it's like you finally understand like what we had to deal with these filthy Arabs.
Yeah, no, I think
Um,
so. I think it's like we were warning you, like that kind of thing.
yeah,
Like, yeah, I'd really like to make a supercut one day of like every big show that like came back like after 9/11 and like had to do an episode addressing 9/11 because that would be a pretty like horrific, weird montage to watch. Because like I remember like the South Park episode after the first SNL episode after 9/11, like a lot of them, some of them like took a week off, but then like I guess Aaron Sorkin did a weird play. Like
I don't
everyone felt
remember.
like they had to
Yeah,
do something like like special or like somber
the only
or
other one I
whatever.
remember was I forget which late night host it was, but it was Giuliani going on. And that's another thing about post 9/11 articles. Like the reverence of Giuliani
Right.
is so like hilarious,
Yeah.
especially now when he's like the ultimate freaking
Goblin.
maggot. Yeah, like
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
the maggot in chief. I guess he's not. I guess Trump would be maggot, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah. Saying that out loud, like obviously I've never heard anyone say that in
Maggot.
real life. Yeah, but I've seen like a million libs use that term. That is supposed like I only just now realized that it's like supposed to be maggot. Is
Right.
that
It took me a long time
that's
to
so
realize it was
weird. That's
supposed to be
so
maggot. Yeah,
weird.
yeah. I
I
always thought
thought it
why is
was
there
just
a
like
typo?
like
I
a
don't know.
weird dehumanizing term that they like. I thought it was a portmanteau of MAGA and hat.
Okay.
Because like they're
Yeah.
like these clones that wear hats, and that's like some kind of yeah. I never put that together until just now, so maybe I'm dumb. But
It's up there with
um,
bushy as like a lib term for like somebody that liked Bush in the 2000s. These bushies. I always hated that shit. Like,
yeah.
shut the
But
fuck
I
up. Like,
remember the like the late night episode where like, I forget which host it was, but it like asked you like, "Sir, is it okay for us to laugh again?" Do
right.
you remember that?
Oh my God. Yeah, I forget.
Yeah.
I forget who asked him if it was okay. I think maybe it was SNL that like brought him on and asked for like his blessing. And then like he made a joke and then they were like allowed to do bits again.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, it
I
was
mean,
we got psyop, folks.
yeah, I
Like
mean
we
everyone
got
like
psyop.
thought it was like cringe when they had Kristen Wiig like play Hallelujah and like her character as Hillary
Oh,
like
or
after
Christy
the Trump
what's
election,
it?
but
Kate McKinnon. Yeah,
yeah. Oh, sorry, I got them confused. They're both like SNL ladies, right?
they
Okay.
are.
I obviously don't watch SNL, but but yeah, no, it was really not that cringe compared to like what we had to deal with after 9/11.
No, I'm
Um,
sure the jokes in the coming months about like bombing Afghanistan and everything were like pretty bad, like look pretty bad in retrospect.
yeah. Well, we all know like
Um
the famous Kandahar sketch.
oh, that's
Um,
right. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that's right.
which everyone was like, it's satirical, it's making fun of people like celebrating. It's like, no, the point of it was that like the war on we gotta like, we can't just think that the war on terror is gonna be over in one day, it's gonna be a tough battle. It was that same sort
Right.
of like 9/11 piousness. It wasn't like making fun of like the American like the war on terror itself. Or like
Right.
American jingoism. It was
Right.
making fun of people who thought the war on terror would be over quickly.
Would be easy.
Yeah,
No.
when no, it's gonna be a test of our souls.
What a funny boy. What a funny bit.
LOL. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So anyways, yeah,
Yeah.
we all got psyoped in America,
Yeah.
turned into
And
this
yet,
kind of I don't know.
like now, it's very interesting, yeah, like how all that has panned out now because like all of this, like literally something that is like a textbook act of terrorism is somehow justified. It's amazing, like the cognitive dissonance and like the just like absolute like friend enemy distinction,
Oh
not to be
yeah.
like too Schmittian, that like just completely governs this entire thing. Where it's like literally just imagine if Hezbollah did something like that in Israel.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, it
Just
goes without saying.
imagine.
It goes without saying. But
Like,
they're not gonna play fair. Yeah, I think we know
no.
that.
And of course they don't have like escalation dominance. I mean, it is like a great it's just, it sucks that like, none of these people who can retaliate and just have to like suffer it and like,
Yeah.
you know, it'd be nice if someone could like fight back. But the only real hope is for like America to stand up to Israel. But that seems like that's not gonna fucking happen anytime soon.
No, the
Um
odds are not
So
high.
speaking of
But who
people
knows?
speaking of the special relationship,
Right.
let's cast our attention back to the turn of 1920. Yeah, I did want to read like a little bit of this article about Ottoman land law because we touched on Ottoman land law a little bit in the earlier portion of this series,
Hmm.
talking about Miri and Mulk and Lef
Right.
and all these sort of land designations. And it's kind of interesting, I mentioned last time like the destruction of the clock tower in Jaffa
Right.
because it was too like French style.
Yeah, everyone
And
loved it
how
and they had to get rid of it.
yeah, exactly. And it was like super useful, and it was beautiful, but it had to be destroyed. The kind of their like strange like antiquities policy and the way they wanted to like create a certain image of Jerusalem. It's very
Hmm.
interesting how like an idea of like applying Ottoman law now compared with the issue of like the Mufti, like this doesn't feature as like a Zionist talking point as much today, where like
Hmm.
you see like these freaks like David Simon bringing up the Mufti and
Yeah.
he was Hitler's best friend or like whatever.
Yeah.
But it was a huge Zionist talking point back then that all they were doing was applying the Ottoman land law. And it's kind of interesting, for those who have an interest in like kind of the arcane intricacies of land law, maybe it's interesting. But I do want to read a little bit from this article by Martin Bunton called
Okay.
"Inventing the Status Quo: Ottoman Land Law During the Palestine Mandate, 1917 to 1936."
Hmm.
So he starts off. British attempts after 1917 to incorporate Ottoman legal institutions in their management of Palestine's land regime shed light on important, though largely neglected, features of colonial rule in the Middle East between the world wars. Although laws and legal procedures played an integral part in the British establishment of a new political and economic order in Palestine, their role has yet to be studied in its historical context. The literature on Palestine is predisposed to view the role played by Ottoman land law under British rule as axiomatic. It followed naturally from the imposition of the British pattern of indirect rule and, more specifically, from the Order in Council of September 1922, which set out the composition and organization of the government of Palestine. Such presumptions are helped by the prevailing conception of Ottoman land law as codified. But historians must not take at face value the picture drawn by British apologists at the time who, like the 1937 Peel Commission report, complained that the Ottoman land code has been retained with all the difficulties involved in its various forms of ownership and tenure of land. Several new laws have been passed to amend it, but it remains in essence the same complicated system, one which is not calculated to promote close settlement and intensive cultivation. Even with the amendments which it has been found possible to introduce, it cannot be deemed to be a satisfactory system in these respects. In attributing the land law enforced during the mandate to the written Ottoman codes dating from 1858, the British officials often wish to characterize it as bewildering and antiquated, a barrier to modernization and progress. Missing from the literature, and it is an attempt to problematize and contextualize the Ottoman law enforced during the mandate. In fact, Ottoman law in Mandatory Palestine should not be studied as though it were a detached arbiter with fixed rules waiting to be administered by colonial officials. The historical study of land law is better served by recognizing it as a contested domain. Post Ottoman land law needs to be viewed more as a construct of the mandate, less as a bequest of the fathers of the 1858 Ottoman Land Code. This article examines the conditions under which a specifically Palestinian land law was created and subsequently evolved. One of Britain's responsibilities under the mandate was to facilitate the creation of a Jewish national home in Palestine, as we know. Though they represented 10% of the population at the end of the First World War, Jews in Palestine increased to almost 30% by 1936, as we talked about before. Absolutely crazy. The pace and volume of Jewish immigration and, to a lesser extent, land purchase underlay the political tensions during the period. For Jews, immigration and the acquisition of land were the keys to a political entity. For Palestinian Arabs, they brought fear of a threat to their political existence. Despite the political importance of land purchases by Jews, however, they did not determine the British interest in Ottoman land law. Similarly, although Zionism was one aspect of the context that shaped Palestinian land law, to suggest that before the disturbances of 1936 it was simply a manifestation of the Jewish National Home Project would be to write history backwards. To understand the role of the Ottoman land law in the Palestine Mandate, one has always to remember that the British worked on the assumption that they should adhere to the status quo. Note that the significance of Palestine for the many religions gave the principle its urgency. Immediately upon entering Jerusalem in December 1917, the British Commander-in-Chief, General Sir Edmund Allenby, assured the representatives of all the religions that he would protect their interests. Nonetheless, the doctrine of the status quo followed mainly from a professed adherence to the rules of international law issued after the Hague Conference of 1907. Under the Hague Rules, no substantial change was allowed in the laws of an occupied country. With hindsight, the Peel Commission described adherence to the status quo as the normal rule of military administration. But things were not really so foreordained. At the time, it was an open question whether the Ottoman law should apply in Palestine, partly because the Ottoman Empire had not signed the Hague Convention governing the administration of occupied territory. In the region later to become Iraq, for example, the British at first thought Ottoman law too difficult to apply. Shortly after they occupied in 1915 the Vilayet of Basra, thought of primarily as an outpost of the Indian Empire, they drew up a code of law known as the Iraq Occupation Territories Code, which was based on Indian law. The decision to replace the Ottoman legal system in Basra with one based on a colonial model did not set a precedent, however, when the British moved north for the administration of the Vilayet in Baghdad. The British did not worry that the introduction of a foreign code of laws was unjustifiable under international law. Rather, Sir Edward Bonham Carter, sent from Egypt to join the Ministry of Justice at Baghdad and become a senior judicial officer, recognized in 1921 the replacement of the legal system to which the inhabitants were accustomed must necessarily cause serious inconvenience to them and could not fail to be unpopular, especially having regard to the fact that much of the law is religious in origin. If both expediency and respect for international law partly explain the decision to adhere to the principle of the status quo in Palestine, the British were also trying to appease the French. At a time when the Egyptian Expeditionary Force was planning to renew the offensive in Palestine in late 1917, serious thought was given by the High Commissioner in Egypt, Sir Reginald Wingate, to placing any territory occupied under Egyptian administration. As Richard Bennett explains, the borders of the Egyptian Frontier Districts Administration would move northwards from Sinai in the wake of the British troops. The Foreign Office, which sharply criticized the plan, had no inherent objection to Egyptian administration in occupied regions, but worried that it might be criticized as annexationist. The plan was therefore quashed out of fear of the repercussions of French resentment of Britain's future position in Palestine. French, and to a lesser extent, Italian susceptibilities about Palestine were described in early 1918 as pressing. The Middle East Committee of the Foreign Office recorded, "The French feel keenly that a great prize in Jerusalem has fallen to Great Britain, and wounded sense of amour propre arouses potential anti-British sentiment based on memories dating from Agincourt and Fashoda. It is therefore of importance that no act of ours should promote the idea that we are endeavoring to extend Egyptian administration or influence, or obtain political post-war advantage by our present actions. Thus, Palestine should be separated from Egypt," Sir Gilbert Clayton, the Egyptian Expeditionary Force's chief political officer, should tell the French High Commissioner for Syria and Palestine, Francois Picot, who was stationed at Jerusalem, that the administration of Palestine would be a matter purely for the general officer commanding, who is an entente instrument as commander of mixed force. The British, it appears, were trying to imply to the French the future of Palestine had not been settled, when in their own minds it had been. For these reasons, the British decided that Palestine should be given a military, ostensibly provisional administration. Owing to the Allies' difficulty in deciding how to share out the occupied Ottoman territories, military rule in Palestine outlasted the military operations but not the negotiations for peace. Although the mandates were not confirmed by the League of Nations until July 1922, the British military administration in Palestine gave way to a civilian administration in June 1920, owing in large part to the Treasury's reluctance to continue to disguise expenditure in Palestine as military expenditure to be borne by the British taxpayer. Adherence to the Hague Convention, which remained by the declared policy of the civil administration, found expression in Article 46 of the Palestine Order in Council of September 1922. It assured the local population that the jurisdiction of the civil court should be exercised in conformity with the Ottoman law in force in Palestine on November 1st, 1914. British observers during the mandate did not consider the question of Ottoman law in force as overly problematic. The Peel Commission, for example, concluded in 1937 that it is true that no new system has been introduced, no new land code has been enacted. The Ottoman land code remains in essence the same complicated system. The same conclusion was reached in 1946 by the Survey of Palestine, which upheld that the ordinances enacted by the government of Palestine have not greatly modified the Ottoman land tenure. So you can see how this is sort of back projected to justify what would happen later.
Right.
British pronouncements on Ottoman law are often inseparable from their attempts to legitimate colonial rule. How else, for example, is one to make sense of the first High Commissioner, Sir Herbert Samuel's, attempt to sum up his 4-year term by claiming in 1925, after he had enacted more than 130 new ordinances, that it had been the policy of the government not to change the laws which closely touched the lives of the people and to which they were accustomed. A year earlier.
How nice of him.
He accepts, there are 130 new
For
ordinances.
130,
yeah. A year earlier, he explained, it is inadvisable to introduce large change in the existing law of the land, particularly at this juncture when there does not exist a legislative body representative of the inhabitants. In the 1920s, it was no longer permissible for an occupying power to change local laws and ignore the rights of the inhabitants. Europeans were meant to act as trustees who administered indigenous populations by their own law in their own interests.
Mm-hmm.
British colonial officials emphasized the rule of law, at least rhetorically, because the provision of justice was considered vital to the prestige of British colonial rule. Officials in Palestine were constrained by their obligation to appear to act in accordance with the rule of law. As H.F. Morris and James S. Reed remark, a convincing legal advisor at the Colonial Office, Henry Grattan Bush, for example, could have a profound influence on policymaking merely by continually asking colonial administrators for clarification of the government's legal position. The rule of law also provided a missionary-like justification. As Sir William Fitzgerald, the last Chief Justice of Palestine from 1944 to 1948, explained, there can be little doubt, I think, that history will record that Britain's greatest contribution to the science of the government of man is British law and British legal procedure.
Oh my
the
God.
fundamental principle of that law is the principle enunciated by the greatest of lawgivers, the mighty Solon, the equality of all before the law, and the right of every citizen to seek redress in the courts. And whatever the various peoples who have been subject to British rule might think of their tutelage. I do not but bear in mind, this is literally 1948. Whatever they may think of their tutelage, I do not hesitate to mention the one thing they shall forever be grateful for, namely, that we have given to them our ideas of British law.
Wow.
In fact,
thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes. In fact, the inhabitants of Palestine were less grateful than the British expected, perhaps because Samuel's description of the government policy was written at an audience in London and Geneva rather than Lydda and Jaffa. A Palestinian audience would not have accepted so easily the notion that the British administration left their laws unchanged. When the colonial secretary, L.S. Amory, visited Palestine in April 1925, he met a deputation composed of members of the Arab Executive Committee, the National Party, and the Peasants' Party. The minutes of the meeting record the following complaint. As regards law and legislation, we are now administered by a certain kind of legislation in which we have no share at all. Legislators in England said that laws should be derived from the spirit and conditions of the country, but laws as such in Palestine are not derived from the spirit and conditions of the country. They resemble a plant which cannot live, or a sabra, if you will. They do not remain in force very long, and amendments are continually introduced. We know that a law is being issued, but we do not know what it is, as we have no share in it and do not therefore know its provisions. If the laws being issued now by the Palestine government are issued regularly, they will amount to the largest collection of laws and constitutions in the world. Our land is not so fertile in crops as the Palestine government is fertile in giving us laws and legislation, which are considered as a burden by the inhabitants, who have not been used to them under the old regime. As many scholars have noted, the British administration in Palestine interfered most dramatically in the areas of commercial and criminal law. According to Palestine's first Attorney General, Norman Bentwich, the Ottoman criminal law, which was an unscientific and occasionally blundering application of the Napoleonic Code, has largely been replaced by ordinances following English criminal law, and is to be entirely superseded by a criminal law along English lines. The Ottoman Code of Criminal Procedure, which was an application likewise of Gallic source, has been more completely. I love how like all
Gallic
these like
source.
weird pathologies about like Agincourt and stuff are like factored like in here. Like, yeah, there's it's that narcissism of small differences.
Can't
like,
let
you know,
atheistic Catholic
yeah,
France fool us, you know,
exactly.
with their Gallic fucking ways, you know.
Yeah, like on one hand, like it's funny how like they're considering like what the French think more than like anyone, but
right.
on the other hand, like they also like hate them the most.
Yeah, they don't
like,
respect them.
It's a different kind of hatred, I guess. It's like a
like-
personal. It's like the hatred of like a worthy adversary, and
True,
not
I
just like the
guess.
contempt of like subhumans that they have for others,
as well as a kind of neighbor hatred kind of
exactly.
thing.
Like when it came to like, do we respect like what we promised to Faisal or what we promised to France? Then like
they picked France.
It's got to be France. Yeah.
Right. But that doesn't mean they fully respect France and their culture and their
they do
strange
not. Yeah.
atheistic Catholic ways.
No, not at all.
not.
So anyway, this criminal procedure, which is of Gallic source as well, has been more completely replaced by English procedure. And the Ottoman Commercial Code, which translated provisions of the French commercial law of the middle of the 19th century, has been completely swept away. Such emphasis on what Bentwich elsewhere calls the Gallic infusion suggests that for the British, the greater the Napoleonic influence on an Ottoman law, the more justified they were in changing it. When describing changes to Ottoman law, Bentwich adds that no sacredness of religion or custom attached to the Ottoman version of the French Code. If, after all, it was the stated policy of the government not to change laws which closely touch the lives of people and to which they were accustomed, it helped to stress the foreignness of laws which the government did wish to change. So, to me, like, the part of the reason why I wanted to read this is because this is exactly like the music thing and the clock tower thing, where it's like, this isn't pure, like this isn't actually what your religion is or what your law really is, because like we know that better than you do.
Right.
Like we know what pure Arab music is. We know what a pure Arab aesthetic is for the clock tower, you know, like an antique, like really truly Jerusalem aesthetic. Like same way, like we know what real religious laws are, and these are simply like Gallic corrupted laws that we can just get rid of.
Like we're actually the law experts. We're British, so nobody does law like we do. So you guys are not equipped to, you know, interpret it yourself. The interpretation of the law is really the whole thing with the law, right? It's how you interpret it. And yeah, it appears that they interpreted it in some very self-serving ways or very one-sided ways. I think we can say that we're not to the benefit of the Arab population.
Yes. And, you know, this author notes, like, you know, despite the rhetoric, new legal procedures were introduced in Palestine primarily as a means of securing and extending British control, direct or indirect. Not surprisingly, the British showed more interest in aligning the criminal and commercial procedures with British norms. Security and trade were widely accepted as the responsibility of the colonial state. When Ottoman laws did need to be changed to suit colonial priorities, the British, despite their rhetoric, showed little restraint. Substantial justice, minuted one colonial office official in 1921, or sorry, minuted. I was like, what is this word minuted as a verb? But I guess that means like when you're taking minutes of a meeting.
Oh yeah,
often
minuted.
requires
as a verb. Wow.
So substantial justice often requires violation of Ottoman laws. Although not swept away as drastically as commercial and criminal laws, Ottoman land laws were not left untouched. Even before the civil administration was approved by the League of Nations, new laws were promulgated which changed the rules and regulations governing public land, transfer of land and succession, and forests and sand drifts. To understand legislation, one must recognize its origins. For example, the notion of the colonial administration anglicized Ottoman law is misleading insofar as it implies that new laws were imported from the metropolis. To an extent, this was true of land law. The fact that new ordinances, including those ratifying Ottoman laws, were promulgated in English had important consequences because language implies principles. As a director of land registration, Sir John Spry, exasperated with the confusion over how the term land should be defined, commented in 1946, "The proper course, I submit, is to look for the ordinary meaning of the words, which are in the English language. And since they are words in a legal context, the ordinary meaning must be the meaning familiar to an English lawyer. Hence, it is necessary to import the principles of English law." Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's so true that that's because we saw how there were all these different terms and concepts that don't necessarily have a clear English equivalent,
For sure,
right?
for sure.
Which
yeah.
And in a lot of these sort of colonial legal contexts, for instance, we talked about Mort Main way back in our History of Great American Fortunes, right?
The dead
Mort
hand.
Main, that was usually something that had a negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
Something like Waqf, which wasn't is better, I think, translated as endowment than Mort Main. That was often understood as Mort Main, but it doesn't really quite translate cleanly as either. So these people don't really understand what they're doing at all, and they're like, well, it's just land, you fool. It's land. It's what it means. Land. It's
right.
It's the same thing of it really goes back to the title of the whole series, "The Land Belongs to Whom It Belongs," where you have Herzl going and being just give us the land, just give it to us. And it's what do you mean? I can't just give you this land.
It's not mine to give.
Whom it belongs. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And he's yes, it is, but they understand it completely differently.
Yeah, at first glance, that phrase can sound kind of just an evasive, stupid, thing to say, but it does contain kind of multitudes. And that's really what this struggle is the struggle ultimately becomes who does it belong? I mean, yeah, it's interesting, who owns it versus who does it belong to? Even that question is very,
I mean, another factor, there's a completely different, because that's the thing, when you have an idea of the ideas of land ownership, we talked about, way back in the first part of this, that really factors in here as well. They're definitely not universal among all cultures, there is when, as I talk about, the law does have a religious factor, and in that system, all land kind of belongs to God in a way as well. And that's an important factor to consider, right? And a lot of the sort of legal structures are built upon that basic framework, or that idea that there's a trusteeship over the earth, which ultimately belongs to God, because everything does.
That's true.
But not to say that the Ottoman land law completely adhered to that principle, and didn't assimilate, which was again which is natural. Everyone is constantly assimilating things from everything, and even the Sharia itself, there's no doubt that it assimilated aspects from, or the Sharia as applied, fiqh, that it assimilated ideas from Sanasid Persian law, for instance, or Byzantine law, or things like that. Law is always being assimilated. So this kind of fetish of purity is this sort of construct that's only applied as this colonial scalpel to
right very selectively.
Very, very selectively. But
the high priests in their black robe, in their black acolyte robes, and their wigs are sitting there and deciding how to interpret the law in a way that serves their interests. Shocker.
Yeah. Just as one case study here, I do recommend people check out this article. There's one example of case study here. To the extent that Palestinian judgments were recorded and later published, local land law was turned into something akin to case law. Although Palestinian precedents were on occasion invoked and debated in the courts, they were not used methodically, and only at all under significant constraints. Until the early 1930s, little attempt was made to organize previously recorded judgments, most of which in the early years consisted of a few words scribbled on a piece of paper. Nor did they record the cursory evidence presented by litigants. More important cases were occasionally issued by the Chief Justice, Thomas Haycraft, in supplements to the official Gazette. But judicial decisions were not regularly published until the Palestine Post newspaper, following the well-known example of the Times, began in December 1932 to publish reports of law cases. As the service was a private enterprise and the newspaper relished an interesting story, The reports varied a great deal in value. In 1934, they were supplemented by the volume of law reports compiled by Haycraft's successor, Michael McDonnell, on cases decided since 1920, including those heard by the Supreme Court sitting as a court of appeal in land cases. Although Palestine's small size enabled judges and lawyers to exchange ideas informally, the manuals of Palestine law, published in the 1930s, cited very few cases. Owing to the paucity of law reports, one must not overestimate the influence of judicial precedent. During the early years, cases carried no authority, and both judges and settlement officers were freer than usual in the British system to correct their own mistakes. In the Supreme Court at Jerusalem, however, this was less the case. For example, in early 1932, shortly after the Palestine Post introduced its column, it reported a Supreme Court judgment upholding a previous ruling made by a different judge, even though the present judges disagreed with it. In addition to new rules of evidence, definitions of plaintiff and stare decisis, and question of equitable rights was at issue. How do they pronounce that in English
Stare
law? They pronounce
decisis.
it decisis, yes.
Stare
I'm
decisis.
pronouncing it like classic
Yeah.
style, like
And for
Nikis.
for those who
yeah.
don't know, like the sort of like lawyer jargon about like case law, it's basically just like referring back to cases that were already
Yeah.
decided to basically sort of clarify how the law ought to be interpreted. And generally, I feel like both in the American and the English legal system, there is a lot of importance placed on precedent of like, oh, well, that judge in, blah, 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 v, blah, 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 like it was decided that, blah, blah, blah. And then
Right,
if
it
it was,
just means like the decision stands, right? Like the standing.
yeah, and it stands until like a higher court, maybe one day, like, say Roe v. Wade, like decides
exactly.
actually we interpret it differently. Right.
Yeah.
But so there was very little case law kind of kept in like records or made available to people. Is that what it's saying?
No, yeah, true. Like, and it was there were basically no record keeping until 1932 when they started like publishing it in a newspaper.
Yeah. So
But,
which makes me feel like judges could give them a little more wiggle room to do whatever the fuck they want, right? These British judges, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, like it was even worse than that in a way. So anyway, Section 9 of the 1921 Ordinance runs as follows. The Land Court will apply the Ottoman law in force at the date of the British occupation as amended by any ordinances or rules of court issued since the occupation, provided that the court shall have regard to equitable as well as legal rights to land, and shall not be bound by any rule of the Ottoman law prohibiting the courts from hearing actions based on unregistered documents. From the beginning, the notion of equitable rights as stated here was vague and ambiguous. It is likely that the stipulation was inserted in the ordinance primarily to account for the recognition of rights acquired in land since the beginning of the war, but not registered. For example, the 36,760 dunams of land acquired, according to Kenneth Stein, by Jewish land purchasing agencies between 1915 and 1920. Given the administrative turmoil as well as legal prohibition against such purchases, it seems reasonable to agree with Duchan Lando that the stipulation gives the impression that its draftsman was concerned to relieve against the formal demands of the Ottoman laws with regard to the registration of immovable property. But although the stipulation may have been a response to post-war chaos, its interpretation during the Mandate is less easily assessed. It was retained in the 1928 land settlement of Title Ordinance Section 10.3, which confirmed the law applied by the settlement officer would be the land law enforced at the date of the hearing of the action, provided that he shall have regard to equitable as well as legal rights to land and shall not be bound by any rule of the Ottoman law or by any enactment issued by the British military administration prohibiting the courts from hearing actions based on unregistered documents or by the rules of evidence contained in the Ottoman Code of Civil Procedure or the Ottoman Civil Code. Nevertheless, as the courts rarely decided on the basis of oral testimony against a written document, especially a title deed, probably the proviso was used to protect only purchasers who could not register title owing to the war. By 1928, the land courts had decided numerous cases in favor of a registered title to land. Land Appeal number 137 for 1923, for example, held that this is a question whether there was evidence before the land court which could justify it in finding that the registration in the name of Shirk, all right, interesting, was fictitious and should be set aside in favor of the respondents. I guess, I wonder who this land purchaser named Shirk is. I assume not a Muslim.
Pseudonym?
Yeah, but
Shirky land buyer.
Yeah. There is no written evidence to contradict. It was funny if there's some Arab Christian guy whose last name is Shirk, but I doubt it. There is no written evidence to contradict the registered title, which carries a presumption of ownership. The evidence of witnesses, the possession of the respondents, the admissions of other parties interested, however convincing, are not sufficient to override the general rule that has been established in this court that a registered title will not be set aside except by some evidence in writing sufficient to support an adverse title or to corroborate the evidence in support of such an adverse title. The reference to equitable rights in the Land Court Ordinance is not to be confused with the terms of Article 46 of the 1922 Palestine Order in Council, which provided that in the absence of any relevant provision in Ottoman law, the jurisdiction of the courts shall be exercised in conformity with the substance of the common law and the doctrines of equity in force in England. In a similar formula, often expressed in terms of justice, equity, and good conscience, was applied in most of Britain's colonial territories, commonly provided the courts with a residual system of law to fill in the gaps in force. See, so anyone who thinks the word equity was made up,
No,
by
invented
DEI consultants, to put an end to equality and
well,
create,
honestly, sometimes the modern day equity people have a vibe not super unlike maybe some of these British people of like, yeah, it's all about equity. Like, I don't know, it has always been a red flag word of
well,
like means something slightly
I
different.
guess I could get down with the argument that if you're like that suspicious of the word equity, then you should also be suspicious of like the mass transfer of land to Jewish settlers in Palestine. Which was also done in the name of justice, equity, and good conscience in legal systems throughout the empire. Its use defies historical generalization. As Sir Kenneth Roberts Ray warns, its operation may be affected by circumstances of almost unlimited breadth. The facts of the case, the individuals concerned, ethnological, social, and other conditions, and last but far from least, discretional selection from the law of other places. The circumstances under which the common law and the doctrines of equity in force in England were applied in Palestine bear witness to the validity of Roberts Ray's warning. The courts in Palestine did not confront the issue seriously until 1935, when the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council gave judgment in an appeal from Palestine in regard to breaches of contract. No doubt, their lordships directed, the courts in Palestine, when dealing with this question and any other question that arises, would bear in mind the provisions of Article 46. That scholars agree about the significance of the Privy Council's judgment in defining the conditions under which the doctrines of equity should apply attests to the previous reluctance of the Palestine courts to apply them. On the whole, concludes Dukhan Lando, it can now be said that it is remarkable how slow and reticent the courts were in using the possibilities that were provided by Article 46. To explain why is not difficult. First, the Ottoman legislation, that is to say, Ottoman legislation as it appeared to British legal officers, left few gaps to fill. The Ottoman law is good enough, Haycraft remarked. We quarrel with it sometimes because it seems peculiar, but there is always an argument for it. Second, when there were gaps in the law, the Palestine courts did not relish the role of filling them. This was the role of the legislature, not the judiciary. Third, as Asaf Livkovsky notes, several members of the judiciary were opposed to applying imported laws to an indigenous population, which, not being able to acquaint themselves with the complexities of English common law, would remain unaware of it. It is a fundamental principle, wrote Randolph Copeland, that people must have an opportunity of knowing what the law is. Dowson made the same point in November 1925. It must also, I think, be recognized that both the economical and effective administration of law are difficult to secure without understanding and cooperation on the part of the public, and that these cannot be expected if the texts of current laws and regulations are so difficult to obtain. This being said, students of legal history of Palestine are constrained in the formulation of general hypotheses by the shortage of evidence. In a discussion of the role of Article 46 in Supreme Court decisions, Likovsky qualifies his conclusions by cautioning the reader that the subject is wide and a thorough investigation of the subject must also include the British judges in the lower courts of Palestine, British officials in the legal department of the Palestine government, and officials of the Colonial Office in London, Jewish and Arab judges, lawyers, and laymen. Court records and judicial notebooks, while they exist for Palestine, have yet to be comprehensively analyzed. Now, there's a project for somebody. I'll just read from his conclusion because it kind of wraps things up. For Ottoman law in Palestine to become Ottoman law in force during the British Mandate, it had to be discovered, translated, drafted, pleaded, interpreted, and taught. Put simply, the effect of these processes was to present British legal administrators with choices when trying to define the Ottoman legal status quo. A great deal of discretion was left to the British legal administrators to align the rules relating to property rights in Mandate Palestine with the administrative necessities of the colonial state, and to ensure that post-Ottoman land law should suit the exigencies of colonial rule. The effort required to digest the Ottoman law in force, an unruly collection of laws, provisional laws, and administrative orders, not only ensured that a new Palestinian law would emerge, it also obliged British officials to decide how they would interpret Ottoman law. Yeah, like you said. To understand how a particular Ottoman law was interpreted, one must provide the historical context in which the decision was made. As with any legal history, students of Mandate Palestine are on surest ground if they specify the individuals who define or judge the laws and the circumstances in which they act. In a recent work on Ottoman agriculture, Donald Quatert compares Ottoman land law to the elephant of the blind man, as it appears to scholars in different guises. British colonial officials in Palestine, however, were describing a mythical creature of their own making rather than an elephant. The guises in which Ottoman land law appeared to them owed most to their own imaginations.
Yep. So that was one front of the sort of creeping takeover.
Yeah.
Subtle, but important.
Yeah. There's a great section here about like law classes, like that they were teaching, and that how little sort of resemblance they bear to Ottoman law. It's or the Ottoman laws that it existed, previously.
Right.
It's definitely an article that I recommend.
We're about an hour in now. Do we want to talk about the Mufti?
Yeah, I think so. I think we should talk about the Mufti.
We got to talk about the Mufti. We need to talk about the Mufti. An interesting and complex figure, to say the least.
Yeah,
I think we've both been reading from a biography from 1988, The Mufti of Jerusalem, al-Hajj Amin al-Husseini and the Palestinian National Movement by Philip Matar. Right?
Yeah, someone who's written like a fair amount about like the Mufti, even though it's like a very even-handed portrait, and it does like acknowledge that like the Mufti, like some of like what is said about him like has something to it, like he definitely like did eventually later in his life like become like sympathetic with the Nazis and like wanted to curry favor with them and things like that. So it's a pretty, it doesn't like kind of like, it's not like an extremist account or something that's trying to kind of like totally launder the history of this guy in any way, or like deny or like, or make up things or anything like that, or that like totally at odds with like, even the sort of incredibly one-sided Zionist historiography of him. There are points where he agrees with elements of that portrayal, at least, it's not like completely detached from reality in his telling, but he like got like people went after him so hard just for like telling like the truth about the Mufti.
Wait, people went after him for this book?
Yes.
Because I was gonna say like it's pretty, I appreciate it that it's like it tries to be like pretty balanced and like not, I mean, a constant refrain throughout it, and I haven't gotten to the total end of it yet, but he brings it up a lot that like in certain events that happen, say like the Wailing Wall riots and other things, he says that there are a lot of, the Zionist historians, and polemicists who hate him and thus like exaggerate his influence and like, oh, the Mufti, like every time there was like a riot, like the Mufti knew, he fucking knew, he did this. And then on the flip side, there are a lot of Arab nationalists who kind of like revered the Mufti or, were followers of his or whatever, basically apologists for whatever, and sometimes would exaggerate his role in certain events of like the glorious Mufti, like of course organized this like riot, and it's and he's like actually in reality, like the truth, at least so far. Haven't really gotten to the Nazi period yet, that we will cover that. But like say like in the 1920s, he definitely comes off as like a figure that is trying to balance between between like the Scylla and Charybdis of his British overlords and the Palestinian people, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes is like not the first person to like go out in the streets and like let's go kill them, or burn them or whatever the fuck.
No, not at
Like is
all.
actually trying to like tamp down some of the more radical elements that were emerging in this kind of nascent Arab nationalist movement that saw him as like a fucking cop basically, and were like,
Yeah.
you collaborate with the British, like fuck you,
Which he
like you're
did.
not our
They were
leader. He
right.
did. He absolutely
Yeah,
did.
he was absolutely collaborative with them, and he thought like that he could, by doing that, like maybe again, it was in a way like the same
He's
old
a
story.
radical centrist. Well,
Yeah.
actually,
Well, and
not that
it was
radical. And then,
it was in
yeah.
a way the same old story of someone who was like overly trusting and thought that if he went along, he could distract concessions and that they would actually listen to him. And that like some of their like commitments to a state, like for all of its citizens or whatever, like,
Mhm.
or, to respecting the religious rights, even though we must establish a Jewish national home and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, he maybe thought that he actually could get something from them if he was a good boy. But then I think as time went on, he was like, wait a minute, that's not true. And he basically became radicalized by the experience of trying to work within the British Mandate.
Yeah, it's sort of, you
That's the
could say
narrative
maybe
that Film Latar has of him anyway.
yeah, it broke
Yeah.
broke his brain a little bit. It broke his spun his moral compass around in some unfortunate directions, I think, by the time World War II was breaking out. But I think we will get into that history of like, because I think to hear your regular Zionist kind of tell it, this guy was just like Grand Mufti, hater of Jews. Like he just
Yeah.
like his whole life, he was just like the most anti-Semitic, hateful, blah 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 person who's just like plotting nonstop to like kill everybody. And it gets really wild. Like I mean, Netanyahu literally said that the Mufti gave Hitler the idea of the Holocaust, like that Hitler like wasn't gonna do it otherwise, or like use furnaces or crematoriums or whatever. And then the Mufti, he said, "Well, why don't we just send all the Jews down here?" And the Mufti's like, "Oh no, that's not going to work. We hate them too much. You know what you should do? Burn them." And then Hitler's like,
Right. Yeah.
"Oh, Mufti, I like this idea." It's like,
No,
okay,
I
now that
actually,
said,
yeah.
like he did meet with the Hitler, and like he joined, basically he backed the Axis powers. In fact, like one of the more bad looks during that period, I believe, is that he went to Sarajevo when it was occupied or was under the Ustasha independent state of Croatia, and was like meeting with religious leaders there. And I think there was a like small division of like Bosniak Muslim SS,
Right. You always
Einsatzgruppen
see
kind of
that.
fighters
Yeah.
and stuff.
Like,
And so you had not a good look getting in bed with like Pavlich and like that kind of, because they were rapidly genociding, Serbs and Jews and stuff like
yes.
that. So like, definitely they're big marks. But it is an interesting question of like, how did he end up there? Like, how did he end up? And I think, yeah, the Zionist version of it is like, well, do we even have to tell you? He's obviously just like, he hates Jews, like, like end of
Yeah.
story. But actually, I mean, though he was, I would say, like from his early life, I mean, as this book describes, like aware and like kind of vigilant about like the Zionist sort of threat to Palestine. Like
Yeah.
early on, he was sort of made aware, both I think through his father and through Rida, his mentor, who we've brought up before, right?
Yeah.
Rashid Rida in Egypt. Right,
Yes.
right. Who does pop up back into this like story
Yeah.
when the Mahdi sort of
Hmm.
assumes power. He
Yeah, he was a
was a
big influence, like, on, like, basically his whole ideology early on.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so he was aware, however, to characterize him as like kind of the bloodiest, like, murderous hater and like guy that just wanted, like, he didn't necessarily start out that way. He started out trying to kind of work and finesse the system, basically use his pulpit that he got after his brother died, who was the previous mufti, right? Who was also like a
Mhm.
good friend of the British, and try to like chart a careful middle course where he could keep credibility with his Palestinian constituency, also reach out a lot to other Muslim countries, right? and try to build ties and kind of I think this book kind of like is kind of like making the argument that the focal point of Jerusalem for Muslims was something that was at least amplified somewhat by
Yes.
the Mufti
Yes.
through a lot of conscious effort of like organizing conferences and stuff and like focusing the attention of Muslims in other various countries all around the world, focusing on like the holiness of Jerusalem and making sure that it stayed kind of under, Muslim control, right?
Absolutely. And like that, another factor in that was just the whole idea of like, because as we talked about this, the post of like Grand Mufti of Jerusalem was like a
Right.
British invention.
The
Right?
grand
And
part
like,
was, right? There was a
yeah,
Mufti of
there
Jerusalem, but
was a
then they
Mufti,
like,
but it was kind of, yeah. And I think people in Husseini's family, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who of course is, the Grand Mufti himself, like
yes,
people had actually held that post or like, they've been
since
active.
the like
Yeah.
18th, or I think even before like the
Mhm.
18th century, they sort of lost it to like different families for a while, but
Yeah,
then
they
they
were
kind of
like in
got
a
it
war.
back.
Yeah, they were
And
dueling families.
and who
Yeah,
was
yeah.
there was one family they had a very Hatfield McCoy kind of like long
Yeah,
running feud with, which
I
had
don't
a lot of
remember
consequences.
exactly. Yeah.
They're oh my god, Nashashibi, the Al
Yeah, yeah, yes. Yeah,
Nashashibi
yeah, yeah, yeah,
family.
yeah. Another big
Yeah,
family.
yeah.
Yeah.
These two I mean, we really talked about like the importance of these leading sort of local elite Palestinian families, and it is shocking. It's like the Khalidis are just like popping up like every five
Yeah.
seconds now. Where it's like, oh, it's interesting that author was a Khalidi, and it's like, oh, a Khalidi. Like these people were. I've seen other names of even people that I've met who are like Palestinian descent before
Mhm.
that have names where I'm like, oh shit, I think that's literally like like their
Yeah.
ancestor or their great great uncle or something like that.
Mhm.
Because a
Mhm.
lot of them moved to other like Gulf countries or abroad after 1948. But the Al Husseini definitely up there as
Yeah.
one of the most prominent families, and I think by the time we get to like the World War I period, you have kind of the older generation that worked within kind of the Ottoman system, right?
Yeah.
And and had certain privileges that they had sort of like institutional privileges they'd accrued over that time, and were more keen to like stick with the Ottomans and maybe lobby for like more Arab autonomy or whatever. And I think that's where Al Husseini started, like by the beginning of World War I. But I think the behavior, as we discussed, of the Ottomans, some of the stuff they were doing during the war, and the crackdown on like Arab independence leaders and all kinds of other things, like eventually turned him to a point where when the Arab revolt broke out, he finally switched his allegiance to Faisal and
Yeah.
became
I
kind of an Arab
highlighted
nationalist.
I highlighted this part of the book, which is, first, he writes, the policy of Turkification in the Arab provinces was instituted at the expense of the Arab language and culture.
Hmm.
Second, the Turks increasingly followed an apparent policy of secularization by de emphasizing Islam. Third, Turks, perceiving a threat to the empire, harshly dealt with Arab nationalists, executing 22 in mid 1916, all things we talked about in the past.
Yeah.
When both the religious and political basis of his allegiance to the Ottoman Empire were undermined, Amin joined a secret Arab society which sought decentralization within the empire. While in Turkey, Amin was constantly aware of his attachment to Palestine. During the war, he carried with him a short poem, perhaps his own, indicative of his political sentiments. This is my country, and the country of my ancestors. I will sacrifice myself for the sake of its sons. Indeed, his diary was filled with poems and notes about his love for his country. In an essay composed during the war, Amin wrote about the bonds between the Palestinians and the Syrians, yet it was clear that he considered them a separate people. Of all the people in Palestine and Syria, he most admired the Jerusalemites, whom he boasted were honest, self sacrificing, sharing, courteous, inseparable, and loyal to one another. It is obvious from this and other private papers that the criteria by which he judged people, Turks, Palestinians, Syrians, Jews, Catholics, were the Islamic ideals he learned during his childhood, which he constantly tried to emulate. His tendency to boast and to reminisce about fellow Jerusalemites also demonstrates that he was homesick during the war. In another poem, he began, "Whenever I mention Jerusalem, my tears flow." It is useful at this point to summarize and put in perspective Amin's loyalties to the seemingly contradictory ideologies of his day: Ottomanism, pan-Arab or pan-Syrian nationalism, and Palestinian nationalism, right? All these things, all these currents we kind of talked about and like the sort of nuances of all this. Like most Arabs, Amin was an Ottomanist, loyal to the Ottoman state, based on his feelings of identification with fellow Muslims within the empire. Between 1912 and 1917, his loyalty weakened under the impact of Turkification, the influence of Reda's ideas of reform and decentralization, and his own experience in the Turkish army, as is evident in his diaries of 1915 and 1916. But political loyalties took time to crystallize, and a few years of friction with the Turks were not sufficient to make him abandon Ottomanism for a clearly defined ideology such as pan-Arab nationalism. When Amir Hussein declared the Arab Revolt in mid-1916, Amin and other Palestinians saw it as an opportunity to thwart Zionism, over which he had been deeply concerned for years, by seeking to reunite Syria and Palestine. When the occasion presented himself, he abandoned the Ottoman army and Ottomanism and joined the Arab Revolt. He goes on to note that early on, he discarded his Ottoman uniform for the Arab army of Faisal, who was then fighting with the British to drive the Turks from Palestine. Amin, described in a British report as very pro-British, became a recruiting officer for Faisal's army and worked with Captain C.D. Brunton. He encouraged Ottoman-trained Palestinians to volunteer for the Arab army, and he toured the occupied part of Palestine to help organize a force of about 2,000 Palestinians. Duh, Mufti, everyone. You know, this freaking scumbag who was just a radical.
Pretty cool with the British early on, during this Lawrence of Arabia period.
Yeah,
you know,
and that's, and that eventually was the reason for, even though they did have some friction, he did have to become a fugitive at a certain point, right? After the 1921 riots.
He organized, I think he organized like a protest that was peaceful, but then I forget what happened where he violated some law where like he had a peaceful protest and then they banned peaceful protests, and then maybe he went and did another one, or it was like might have been like a religious kind of festival, the procession that he kind of low-key politicized.
I think
it might be
that
I forget if that was the Nabi Musa.
When it was earlier that he that happened.
He runs away for a while. I think he goes to Damascus, right? And then there was kind of like this incident where one of the British like high commissioners goes to like a Bedouin town, and then somebody comes in and is like, "Oh, Amin al-Husseini and I forget the name of his accomplice are both like hiding out here. Let's go get them." And then the British High Commissioner, in his infinite wisdom, is like, "No, like it is Bedouin custom that they protect like their guests. They will kill us if like we try." And then they came out, and I guess like one of the local, elders came up and pleaded with them to pardon Amin al-Husseini for whatever he had done, to pardon both of them. And immediately the British commissioner is like, "Actually, that's a great idea. I am going to pardon them." And then like they brought them out after that. And I guess al-Husseini did not want to accept the pardon because he didn't think that he did anything wrong that deserved pardoning. But then his brother, who was the Mufti at the time, right, fell ill.
Musa Kazim al-Husseini. Yeah. There's actually a pretty good account of it in here. So he helped organize prisons in Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Haifa on February 27, 1920 to protest the chief administrator's proclamation the British government intended to enforce the Balfour Declaration. As 2,500 Arabs in Jerusalem passed a Jewish school, the Zionists decided to play their anthem, Ha Tikva, but the march proceeded without incident. Amin also helped organize demonstrations at the country on March 8, 1920, the day Faisal was proclaimed king of Syria. Some of the most prominent members of the community participated, including two pashas, a Turkish honorific title, Musa Kazim al-Husseini, mayor of Jerusalem, and Arif al-Dajani. The demonstration in Jerusalem was orderly, and later a written protest was submitted to the Palestine government. Signed by representatives of the three nationalist organizations, including Amin, it demanded Syrian independence and the unification of Palestine with Syria. It also stated its opposition to Zionism and Jewish immigration. The British, alarmed at such a show of national unity, banned further demonstrations. That's what I guess
that's
you're
right.
talking about. Amin and other young Palestinians managed to get around the British prohibition by turning a religious celebration in April into a vehicle for political protest. The April incident became violent and marked a turning point in popular perceptions of Amin. The Zionists came to hate him as a Muslim fanatic leading an anti-Jewish pogrom, while Arab nationalists viewed him as a Palestinian patriot, leading a revolt against British imperialism and Zionism. Both these polemic versions misrepresented the man, because he was neither a fanatic nor the leader of the revolt. Neither the later Arab writers who praised him, nor the Zionists and Westerners who vilified him, had access to sufficient information about his role in the April violence, but assumed a larger role on the basis of his subsequent history and importance. It is necessary, therefore, to research the facts about the event which enabled him to begin his stormy political career. By coincidence that year, Passover, Easter, and the Muslim holiday of al-Nabi Musa took place at the same time in early April. Amin and his colleagues galvanized Christian and Muslim Palestinians to use the Easter and al-Nabi Musa celebrations to demonstrate support for Faisal, who had just been crowned king in Syria. We talked about how this was a messy issue, and to express opposition to the idea of a Jewish national home. Amin returned from a month's visit to Damascus with a curious notion, perhaps reinforced by General Waters Taylor, the chief of staff, that Britain did not oppose handing Palestine over to Faisal. Amin shared this perception with his comrades on April 1st. The atmosphere before the violence was therefore one of expectation concerning Syria and Palestine, but apprehension concerning Zionism. The few basic facts known about the events of April 4th are found in the interim and final Palin reports of the British military team that investigated the riots in Jerusalem. The Nabi Musa procession on April 4th halted on Jaffa Street in front of the balconies of the Arab Club in the municipality building. The crowd was offered lemonade while they listened to anti-Zionist speeches by Musa Kazim, Arif al-Arif, Amin, and others. Amin's speech is not recorded, but he apparently held up a portrait of Faisal and shouted, "This is your king," to which the crowd responded, "God save the king." And then, when the speakers were still outside the city walls, a spontaneous disturbance began in the Jewish quarter of the Old City. Some sources claim that Jews provoked the outbreak, but there is no doubt the violence was a result of Arab hostility. The Arabs attacked Jews, killing 3 and injuring many others. Then an armed Jewish group organized by Ziv Jabotinsky.
No. It's Ziv Jabotinsky. We talked about him before. This is Jabotinsky. I'm pretty sure this is the Jabotinsky, who eventually did split off and became a more radical, militant Zionist that made some of the other Zionists back in Europe nervous. The revisionist Zionist. Yeah.
He was the founder of the Zionist revisionist movement, which opposed the political line of the World Zionist Organization.
Right. So, if we're going to talk about the Mufti's first riot, I think we have to talk about Jabotinsky's first riot as well, because he was there on the ground. An armed Jewish group organized by Ziv Jabotinsky, retaliated by killing and wounding demonstrators as well as Arab bystanders. The British police finally subdued both Arabs and Jews after contributing to the final death toll of 5 Jews and 4 Arabs. Wow.
Interesting that he says they contributed. So they just, I guess, so some Arabs killed Jews, some Jews killed Arabs, and then some British people killed both.
I guess, just contributed. Or I guess they killed a couple of those people that eventually added up to 5 Jews, 4 Arabs. So a couple of those were killed by the British.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Palin Commission report concluded that there were several political causes for the violence. First, Arab disappointment in not being given independence, which was promised them by the British. Second, Arab fear that the Balfour Declaration would deny their right to self-determination. And third, support for the unity of Palestine and Syria under the newly proclaimed King Faisal. Reasonable. All reasonable grievances. So you can see, this is a pretty even-handed portrait. It's just saying okay, the Mufti didn't play as much of a role in this. He wasn't the sole organizer. He was a major force, but he still, kind of said okay, Arab hostility definitely played a major role in the violence. But
this is kind of a January 6th situation. Did he tell them to go storm the Capitol, or did he just get them fired up? And it sounds like his intention was not specifically to get them fired up, whether the rhetoric was maybe he got people a little hyped by holding up, the picture of Faisal and going, "This is your king," or something. I mean, the things happen at rallies, right? People get hyped up. But I don't think that does seem like a relatively even-handed portrait of perhaps something that got a little out of hand, but was not masterminded by him. I mean, there's stuff that he was probably more engaged in later, but early on, it shows how much of a volatile situation this could be when gathering mobs of either side together and then whipping them up and then having the British sometimes just come in and start shooting everybody. It was but these very real issues obviously are these tensions are now coming more to the fore. And
when I was reading about the Mufti, I came across, maybe you came across this as well. Did you come across any articles in the journal the Jewish Political Studies Review?
No, I don't think so. Let me look.
This journal is insane.
Oh, really?
I like it seems like it's just like the most like right wing like Zionist like academic journal like ever. Honestly, you know, I don't even know if that's true. Like, I feel like I'm always thinking like, oh, this must be like the far right wing of Zionism, and then it turns out this actually like the left wing. You know,
Oh,
like
yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't really know if that's true, but it's insane. And it's
What
like
what was it called again?
it's called the Jewish Political Studies Review.
Okay.
I found this one article in there called Palestinians, Arabs, and the Holocaust by Joseph S. Sporel. Basically, the argument, it starts off like just it's crazy. He says, one of the major Palestinian Arab arguments regarding the establishment of the State of Israel that the West facilitated its founding out of guilt over the Holocaust. Palestinians insisted the Holocaust is purely a Western and Christian crime that has nothing to do with them or other Arabs. Like a self-evidently true thing. For example, the Palestinian activist Omar Barghouti writes as follows: Palestinians and Arabs more generally bear no responsibility whatsoever for the Holocaust, a European genocide committed against mostly European Jews, Roma, Slavs, among others. It is therefore not incumbent upon Palestinians to pay in our lives, lands, and livelihoods the price of relieving Europe's conscience of its collective guilt over the Holocaust. Jibril Rajoub, a member of the Fatah Central Committee and former Palestinian Authority security chief, asserted on July 24th, 2014, that it was the Nazis, not us, who did the Holocaust to them. We are paying the price for Europe's crimes against them in the previous century. You know, again, just a bunch of people saying the exact truth, which is that like the Nazis committed the Holocaust and not the Palestinians. But as you might imagine, this article goes on to argue that like somehow the Palestinians actually are responsible for the Holocaust.
Oh, of course, of course. Is this the article with the subtitle like the something about like the one staters or something like that? Oh yeah, like the case of the one state advocates, or is that a different article by
it's
Joseph
just called
Spurl?
I mean, I'm sure this guy has a bunch of insane articles, but
I
this
mean,
is just called Palestinians, Arabs, and the Holocaust.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this other article is called Whitewashing Palestine to Eliminate Israel, the Case of the One State Advocates. Wow, by Joseph Spurl. I think
Yeah,
same author. Yikes.
yes.
Okay. Wow.
But
Oh, and then yeah, I mean, I found a whole like list of JPSR articles that have to do with. There's also a review of Michel Houellebecq's Soumission. There's a book review in this edition.
Okay, read it.
Let me see if I can find it by Michelle Maisel.
Excitement. Hold on.
Okay. Oh yeah, the whole thing's here. It's not too long. Yeah, this is from 2016. This edition. Designated as the most important novel of 2015, Soumission by Michel Houellebecq is a provocative French political cautionary tale. Houellebecq is a well-known, controversial French poet, filmmaker, and writer. His books include extremely graphic sex scenes and scathing attacks on French intellectual elites, thus making him a popular author in France. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Nevertheless, reviewers of his novels have expressed criticism and occasionally disgust. The Muslim presence in France is one of the themes in his books. Although his views appear as fiction, they have angered Muslims. The World Islamic League sued him for incitement to racial hatred, but he was acquitted by a French court. In 2010, the French literary establishment awarded him the prestigious Goncourt Prize for his novel, La Carte et le Territoire.
This is the worst book review I've ever read. Like, why are you telling me who the author is? Like, and also, is this in the Jewish Political Studies Review? Why are you reviewing a novel?
Well, you know.
It's nothing to do with politics or, like, it's a novel. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah, well, yeah, they go on to summarize.
This is just a rag.
They just go on to like summarize it.
Review. I don't care. Like,
it's on
you
like
know,
the
shots
Jewish
fired,
cultural affairs.
You're a rag.
I don't know. Yeah, no. So it just talks about how the woke, you know, French Muslim people try to like say it was bad and you should ban it. And Charlie Hebdo.
Okay,
blah,
so
blah, blah.
What do they?
This
think
is actually
of the book?
Was this before the chart? I forget. No, Charlie Hebdo was 2015. Oh, that's right. Yeah, no. It talks about how the unthinkable occurred when Muslim terrorists targeted the offices of Charlie Hebdo and murdered its staff. Only a few commentators, however, understood that the true importance of the book goes beyond an attack on Islam. Among them was Israel's leftist daily, Haaretz, which described it as a story of France's quiet surrender to Islamic rule, the deeper meaning of the strangely disturbing book.
There you go. The left wing of Zionism. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah. There we go. And yeah, it's just like, okay. Yeah. was a pretty bad review, but they just had to let everybody know about it. They definitely did
What
read
did they
it.
conclude? They concluded that
It doesn't really it just says that like it was controversial, and here are some quotes from people that talked about it. Yeah, it's like it's pretty lame.
Who wrote this again?
Michelle Maisel wrote this in June
Marvelous
2016.
Miss Maisel over
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, this is actually it's kind of a weird ending. It talks about the interview with this guy David Pajadas. In fact, in the interview with David Pajadas, Welbeck is at pain to stress that part of the problem, as he sees it, is that more people are turning to religion, any religion, in reaction to what is perceived as a hollowness and lack of purpose in French society. If that is the case, perhaps it is not surprising that French media figures and intellectuals who do like the bleak portrayal of their country prefer to accuse Welbeck of Islamophobia. Meanwhile, waiting in the wings, a relatively new political party, the Party of the Muslims of France, is flexing its political muscle in local elections, with modest results to date, but with great expectations.
No!
No,
Yeah,
the novel's coming
ominous.
true. If anyone listens to our review of Welbeck's Soumission, that is exactly that's what she's gesturing at, is that this novel is, you know, it's going to come true. The
It's
local
coming true any
Muslims
day
are
now.
they're intimidating at the election. They're flexing their muscle in local
I mean, it
elections.
already did come true. Remember, didn't Mélenchon win? But he's been blocked. It was supposed to come true, but they've just completely blocked him at every turn. What's going on in France? I thought that
Well,
we were supposed to have Soumission,
I don't
but
know. I don't know. Bleak existential patriots in control.
I was excited,
Mm.
but yeah, exactly. Yeah, Macron in control.
Yeah,
Whatever.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
whatever
so
you would
that
describe him as being. I guess a patriot.
they definitely think that this book is a must read, and yeah, you definitely everyone has to check it out. Yeah, there's a lot of articles in this journal
This
about
is
the Mufti and his
yes.
collaborations with the Nazis. Probably good. We might want to return back later as kind of a reference point for like balance some more level-headed histories of the Mufti with the way that he gets portrayed and kind of polemicized and like weaponized, particularly to, I mean, it's one thing to say the Mufti fucked up and he did bad things, but it's really this transference of whatever the Mufti did or associated with the entire Palestinian people.
Like
When
this whole article that I was just mentioning about how Palestinians are to blame for the Holocaust
Mhm.
is basically like most of it is about the Mufti. Like all of it is just a description of the Mufti and how he met with Hitler, etc., etc. Yeah, I mean, it might be good to like check like when we actually do discuss like the like World War II, like it might be good to check in like what exactly was like why, like and again, like yeah, he certainly I would say he dabbled in some tropes. He definitely was anti-Semitic, but at the same time, like literally this entire article is about the Mufti actually. Like I'm just scrolling, I'm scrolling.
Yeah.
I think the word Mufti is on every single page. Like cuz it's long because I was thinking like, okay, he's gonna talk about some other lesser known like Palestinian collaborators with the Nazis or something. No, it's literally just an article about the Mufti.
Yeah, like
Like,
that's the thing
and also
here is
like to
that
call
this
him a
one
collaborator is like a bit of an exaggeration. Like he was a, well, he
no,
was,
no,
but
he
like
I think he
his
was like
collaboration wasn't
he
successful. Like it
well
wasn't like he did like
here
create like radio broadcasts like trying to rally like Arabs to Nazi cause,
but
but how successful were those? Not
I will maybe
substantial.
like narrow it down a little, even to say that like he would personally collaborated, but that doesn't necessarily, it's not the same thing as to say like the entire government or administrative apparatus of like Palestine or the Arabs that he like represented as a quasi British puppet religious leader. It's not a clean map onto like Western political authority, but he wasn't like the president of like Mandate Palestine and like all like the president of all the Arabs and like they voted like ally with Hitler. And also like importantly, like they didn't kill a bunch of Jews. They didn't mass murder Jews during World War
No, exactly.
II.
That's what
That's
I
my
mean
point.
when I say like what was, yeah,
Like
and also
Palestinian Arabs did not do that. Like that even if the Mufti ran off to like Sarajevo to hang out with Hitler and his like cronies and was kind of like making deals with the Nazis and things like that, which is awful. But like it's he didn't like mobilize like the 14th Einsatzgruppen like Palestine division of like Arabs to like go and actually like slaughter any Jews. But I feel like when he's invoked in like these articles, and the sort of common history that we see is it's like kind of ambiently implied that somehow Palestinians were like slaughtering Jews the same way that like people in Europe were.
Right, exactly.
When
Like
it simply wasn't a theater of conflict like
that's
British
what I mean.
Palestine,
Like,
right?
yeah, he was a collaborator in that. Like, he definitely like he got on like the radio. He created propaganda, but that's like a different type of collaboration than like I don't know, like active like stealing secrets or whatever. He definitely was like a propaganda level collaborator.
Or like Stepan
But
Bandera or like Ante Pavlovich. Like those are
exactly,
examples of
or
guys
if
who
he were
actually
actually like
led
a
death
leader who like
squads.
rallied
Like,
people. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the thing. He tried to like rally people to the Nazi cause, but like by all accounts, it wasn't as successful as they hoped. In any like or there's no real like tangible
Right.
evidence. And I'm not doubting that like there probably was like and a lot of people like didn't really know like what was going on, and like also like they were under British yoke and it was awful. So, they probably were like hopeful for German victory, didn't like realize like and things like that, or, for various reasons, right? Like it was an emerging situation. People, so I'm not that there might have been, but like it wasn't something that was organized. And it certainly doesn't mean that Palestinians are to blame for the Holocaust. That's insane.
Well, yeah,
that's
the
but that's what these
really the
people are
bottom line.
saying.
Yeah.
And that's what like
they
Netanyahu is saying.
That's exactly what they say today. And there's
So, like, that is
there's almost
insane.
like a symbolic transference of
Yeah.
like the
It's
crimes
because
that
of
were
that picture of him sitting next to Hitler, where it's like you can just you can make up any kind of fantastical story. Like the idea for the Holocaust was created in this meeting. Like they got one picture. Like the greatest contribution is honestly, really, in a way, inadvertently, and intentionality matters, but inadvertently, he's done more like, he tried to be a propagandist for the Nazis, but ultimately his propaganda contribution has mostly been to Zionists because he provided that one black and
Right.
white picture of a guy who looks like a Muslim cleric sitting with Hitler, which is like, done wonders for them. And literally they've spun so much hay out of that.
No, absolutely. Like it's been this kind of like mass psychological transference thing where then the people that were in Israel could kind of transfer the crimes that were done by like the Nazis and their like European allies, right? And kind of transfer it on to the entire Palestinian people of like, well, these people are exactly the same. When in fact, I mean, we'll get into like the history of. I know the British still like had authority there, but there were explosions of violence like on both sides. Well before World War II, and obviously there was violence after World War II. But like there also was not a kind of like the Grand Mufti. Like I actually there might have been some like violent clashes during those 4 years in Palestine, but as far as I've read so far, there was not like the Mufti organizing a bunch of Palestinian Arabs into like SS groups to like go and like do pogroms,
No.
even like
No,
much less like concentration camps or anything. Like I think it was still relatively safe to be much safer than anywhere in Europe to be a Jewish person during World War II in what was still like Arab majority Palestine, in the sense that like so like despite the Mufti like maybe trying to like whip up some of his people to sort of like get involved in World War II as a way to like protest the British,
or to like strike at the same things that like actually Zionist militias were doing. And that's another important factor, which I'm sure we'll talk about like when we get to the period. It wasn't just like the Palestinians who had people who tried to collaborate with the Nazis. Like
that's
there
the other
absolutely
weird part
were
of
Zionists as well who tried to do the same thing. Like
and
both sides
it,
tried to get in on that because like
yeah.
not all of them were. Even though the British were like absolutely like trying to midwife the state of Israel into existence like in obvious ways that like should not be tolerable to anyone. Like for some people, some certain like Zionists, it wasn't enough. It wasn't fast enough and it wasn't good enough. So like they were wanting to anyone who was an enemy of Britain could have been a friend of them too.
Right, exactly. And there, we'll get in. I think we'll crack into that book, like Zionism and the Age of Dictators, a little bit down the road in this, and talk about like, the Zionist organizations, like negotiations with the Nazis, and the Nazis actually making like an exemption for, I think you could sort of export your wealth, albeit at a heavy tax, if you emigrated to Israel, like specifically. But otherwise, like you couldn't take any of your wealth with you to like the US or other European countries. But like you could, so it was like kind of an incentive to like get people specifically to go to Israel. And I think they did that in exchange for the World Zionist Organization, like dropping a US boycott of German products or something along those lines. Interesting stuff there. And because there is a dark convergence of interests as well with some of the more radical, well, I feel like they're all pretty radical by the 1930s, like the Zionist leadership. But just like today, there's radical and more radical. But, their ultimate goal was to get all the Ashkenazi Jews in Europe to come to Israel so they would have the numbers to properly take it over and set up their own government, right? And so there is like this. Now, I'm not saying that they thought, yeah, like Holocaust, that'll do it, but perhaps the idea of like Germany instituting laws that more or less like end up kicking out or forcing a lot of Jews to move somewhere else, that, hey, maybe we can take advantage of this. And maybe this is like in a weird way, like to our benefit, right? And I think even the Nazis, like, despite their like virulent anti-Semitism, didn't necessarily view like a Jewish Palestine, Jewish state in Palestine as like, oh no, like we can't let them all get together. Like they'll be too dangerous. Like they were actually like, yeah, actually, like interesting. Get them to go conquer like where they came from. And then they're like not in Europe anymore. And then, but they're also like German and like, like that. I think there was some under the table, like I said, despite the insane race science and all that stuff, that, hey, that could work. And we could even like cut deals with the World Zionist Organization to like facilitate that. And so there was a convergence of certain interests up to a point between even the Nazis and the Zionists that were kind of going on low key. It's just a very like, there's a lot of currents happening. Like everyone, the Arabs are looking at this in the 1930s, and we'll talk about the Arab Revolt, but that like it's getting, the numbers partially like spurred by Nazi repression, the numbers of immigrants like flooding into the 1930s starts to really radically escalate. And then they're looking at these demographic shifts and thinking like, uh-oh, like if we don't do something, they're going to take over the country, right? A little more desperation starts to set in. And at the same time, like the Zionists are looking at it and saying, oh, actually, we're getting kind of close. Like maybe we could like pull this off and actually just like take it, and like we're getting almost enough, of a population, blah, blah, blah. And also like we can finally get the British to like kind of just leave. And like, at this point, that's where you see like, I think more tensions between the Zionists and the Brits. Anyways, jumping around a lot, but going back, I guess maybe to early Mufti,
Yeah, I just wanted to, like kind of like I did want to read this like response that Philip Matar wrote to a review of his book by this guy Kenneth Stein that was published in IJMIS, which is like the International Journal of Middle East Studies, which is like actually a pretty good journal, like actually like a respectable one, like not the Jewish Political Studies Review, it's like obviously I'm not saying that like things that are like biased don't get published in there all the time, but you know what I mean. Definitely not something that's just like a complete rag.
It's not like an op.
Yeah, not like well, I mean, I'm not anyway. So Philip Matar wrote, they published this response as well. In reviewing my book, The Mufti of Jerusalem, in IJMIS 23, volume 4, or sorry, issue 4, volume 23, issue 4, 1991. Kenneth Stein states that Matar's primary thesis is that the Mufti was not the extremist depicted in the previous biographical sketches. This is a distortion of my thesis, which in fact had two parts, in which I feel compelled to spell out since most of Stein's criticism stems from this misrepresentation. Far from being static, al-Husseini's career went through two distinct phases. The Palestine phase between 1917 and 1936, when he was a cautious, pragmatic traditional leader who cooperated with the British officials while opposing Zionism, and the exile phase after 1936, characterized by bitterness, inflexibility, and political alliances of dubious value. I support the first part of the thesis with considerable evidence in chapters 2 through 5. Nor am I alone in my evaluation of the Mufti's essential moderation in the first segment of his career. This conclusion was shared by three individuals hardly known for their pro-Mufti or pro-Palestinian bias. Norman Bentwich, the legal secretary for Palestine until 1931, who believed that the Mufti kept the peace between 1921 and 1928. Sir Herbert Samuel, the first High Commissioner of Palestine, who in the 1920s judged the Mufti a moderate man. And Arthur Wauchope, the fourth High Commissioner, who stated in 1934 that the Mufti's influence was on the side of moderation. In fact, Stein makes no attempt to actually challenge his evaluation of the Mufti's early moderation, except with regard to the events of August 1929. He writes that Matar claims that he, that is the Mufti, neither incited nor planned the August 1929 violence. This is true. I do make such a quote-unquote claim, although it is not true, as he implies that my sole source for this conclusion was a majority finding of the Shaw Commission sent to investigate the disturbances. Indeed, while the 200-page Shaw Commission report, together with the voluminous evidence Hart, does constitute the most comprehensive and balanced evidence in the events, I base my findings as well on dozens of other primary sources that are listed in a long chapter, with 83 citations on the 1929 Western Wall violence. These sources all substantially vindicate the Mufti, yet Stein appears to take exception to his conclusion and faults me for providing an incomplete account by omitting the minority and opposite opinion given by MP Lord Snell, the Zionist member of the four-member commission. And what is this opposite opinion regarding the Mufti? It consists of one paragraph, the gist of which is, quote, while I, Snell, am not satisfied that he, the Mufti, was directly responsible for, or even that he connived at, the character of the anti-Zionist campaign, I have not the least doubt that he was aware of the nature of the campaign. I therefore attribute to the Mufti a greater share of responsibility for the disturbance. The Mufti must bear the blame for his failure to make any effort to control the character of the agitation. This hardly constitutes evidence that the Mufti incited or planned the violence, but only that he committed a sin of omission by failing to control the agitation. This brings me to Stein's own sin of omission. He states as a blanket description of my book that Matar's Mufti seeks to leave the impression that Hajj Amin was a temperate man, who did not resort to violence either against Zionists or against other Palestinians. While this is a fair characterization of my depiction of the Mufti up to the mid-1930s, I make no such claim thereafter, and in fact clearly and repeatedly demonstrates that the Mufti thenceforth abandoned his cooperation with the British, advocated rebellion and violence, and was inflexible and intransigent, and contributed to the dispossession of the Palestinians. This is in fact the thrust of the entire second half of my book, to which Stein makes not a single reference. Whatever the reasons for this omission, Stein owed it to Ijmas readers to state my full thesis and review the whole biography.
Wow. So yeah, shots fired.
There you go. Like, just like this, again, like we kind of read from it, you can tell that it's not like, this hagiography of the Mufti by any means, but people were like, and Stein even wrote back and said, like, I appreciate Mr. Matar's comments. However, after reading the book a third time and after reading primary and secondary sources for the period, I remain convinced that Matar depicts the Mufti as less extremist and less prone to spawn violence than he actually was.
Wow.
So there you
really,
go.
No, I guess having read not the entire book, and probably the first half or 2/3, I could see how if you were very anti-Mufti and you started reading it by page 50, you'd be like, this motherfucking shit, and just throw the book across the room and then write an angry Goodreads review about it, because he refrains from describing the bloodthirsty Mufti. But yeah, after the 30s, we're not quite there yet, but he did sort of change in response to conditions, and his early career was not like he said, was actually kind of relatively moderated. It was not bloodthirsty and extreme.
Well, while we're talking about the Mufti, this is we're kind of doing a jazzy approach. We don't rigorously outline anything like Martyr Maid might, and I think even though we're jumping a little bit around temporarily, I feel to really we want to talk about the Nazi stuff, and I think that it might be worth I think it is kind of interesting. I found this one interesting article. I didn't put it in the workflowy because I found it kind of close to our recording time. It's by Michael A. Sells. It's called Holocaust Abuse: The Case of Hajj Muhammad Amin al-Husseini. And it's kind of about the origins of the Mufti idea, you know? And
Okay.
like I kind of think like we could kind of like wait and hold off on like talking about the Mufti till like the World War II period. But now that I think about it, I almost feel like if we do that, then we're just gonna be talking too much about the fucking Mufti, who like was his importance is already exaggerated. And I feel
True,
like,
true. I mean, it's to some extent, it's like interesting to follow his trajectory, like
yeah,
through the political landscape, but to kind of give an idea of like what the forces were and like how things were kind of
yeah, it's
evolving
true.
over
And we don't
time.
really, yeah, exactly. And we don't
It's
really
nice to
have
have a
time to
person to follow sometimes in
yeah,
complicated
that's true.
history.
That's true. Yeah.
Not to overblow his importance into the
Yeah.
overall thing, but just how we
And
like sort of followed like Faisal a little bit. Like it's like because
yeah,
these
I mean
are
you
like
went
big names that like people have very strong feelings about to this day, and
yeah.
kind of do loom large.
But yeah, I mean, we could definitely check in with him and like when he will, I'm sure he will come up in some of the stuff that we read for that period, and like we'll hear. This isn't the last we've heard of the Mufti for sure. But I do think this is an interesting article. It kind of talks about like even kind of some more recent stuff. This is it's kind of meta historical, so I think it's even though it does kind of touch on some of the things you mentioned, like what exactly his litany of crimes were. He spoke on radio programs broadcast to Arab nations, calling on listeners to support the Axis in defeating common enemies, Britain, communists, Zionists, or Jews.
Mhm.
He enlisted Arab students and prisoners of war in Germany into a special Wehrmacht military unit that fought under the motto Free Arabia. He arranged parachute drops and sabotage missions against British targets in Syria, Iraq, and Palestine. He called on anti-Soviet Muslims from the Crimea and Caucasus regions to join the German war effort. And in response to Britain's authorization of a special Jewish legion to fight with the Allies, he urged German support for an Arab pro-Axis legion. He helped SS Chief Heinrich Himmler form a Bosnian Muslim unit of the Waffen SS, and
Right.
to that
Yeah.
end, he told Bosnian recruits that Nazism and Islam shared four key concepts: family, order, the leader, and faith. Woof. And that, I mean, but
Yeah.
almost everything shares those
I
concepts,
know,
but
but like, yeah,
whatever. Like,
the Sarajevo stuff's bad. Like, it's not good. Like, that's
no,
probably the
no.
worst thing because he like
No, I'm
personally
not
like went
saying that
there and
like what he
like,
said was what he did was good. I'm saying that, his argument is not very
oh
robust.
no, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, no, for sure, for
But
sure. But that's
that
some,
church, yeah.
not good. Like definitely putting like his efforts were that's bad.
Yeah.
He sided with the Nazis.
He definitely
Um,
did. There's no question about that.
yeah.
And yeah, he said that
Mostly as
Germany
like
had,
this foreign, like he wanted to set like gather up some soldiers and like send them off like to like because like the war was really not like in the Middle East was not involved in World War II in the same way that like it got caught up in World War One, right?
yeah.
So
Um
he was flying into like Sarajevo and
Yeah, this is
going
this
around
is
to
all
Syria.
fair enough because this is all for that guy who gave us a 1-star review and said biased and one-sided as the title indicates. Let's get it
Right,
all out
right.
there. We won't beat around the bush, right? So where
The
was I
Mufti
here? This is a
definitely
long, yeah.
he went bad at a
The
certain
Mufti
point.
definitely went
He
bad.
went
So,
bad.
he said that Germany had not colonized Muslim peoples. I mean, true enough. In contrast to Britain and Russia, which were also at that moment supporting the Serb royalists whose militias, known as Chetniks, were
Hmm.
carrying out mass killings against Muslim populations of southern and eastern Bosnia. He protested against, yeah, which, that kind
The
of goes against.
Chetniks, yeah,
Um,
yeah, they did some
he
of that for
protested
sure.
against proposals to secure access permission for groups of Jewish children and adults to leave Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary for safety in Palestine, even though he would have been aware that they faced grave danger in Eastern Europe. The most incriminating document regarding Husseini's role in World War II may be one written by Husseini himself, his memoirs, Mudakharat, which were first published in serial form in Arab periodicals in 1960s and 1970s. Husseini wrote with a retrospective view of the ruinous consequences of Nazi rule, but nevertheless expressed his continued admiration of Himmler, who had hosted him for once a year during the war and impressed him as a profound philosopher of history, and complained to him about the perfidy of Jews, and, Husseini claims, shared secret information with him in 1943, including news of Germany's nuclear program and the number of European Jews that had perished since the outbreak of the war. The Judeophobia of the memoirs is robust. It includes scriptural phobia, the selective use of Quran, Hadith, and Sirah, as well
Mm.
as Bible and Talmudic literature, to portray Jews as enemies of God and humanity, the conspiratorial phobia that sees the hidden hand of Jewish power behind the world's ills, and the ritual phobia of the blood accusation, the calumny that Jews, in obedience to their religious obligations, kidnap and murder non-Christians and use their blood in Passover matzah and Purim pastries. Husseini also approvingly recalled Himmler's remark that during the deportations of Dutch Jews, only Jews responded to Nazi offers to pay for information on Jews in hiding, as well as Himmler's story that, upon inspecting a concentration camp, he had been shocked to observe that some Jewish prisoners were being abused and that abusers were Jewish capos, whereupon he immediately ordered that those guilty of the mistreatment were punished. In addition to embracing these Nazi professions of moral outrage at the purportedly unchivalrous behavior of the people they were in the process of destroying, Husseini also recalled his visit to Alfred Rosenberg's Institute for the Study of Judaism, where he had been impressed by the Institute's 70 full-time academic experts who, through historical, cultural, and religious research, were purportedly seeking to discover a method to civilize Jews in a peaceful manner. He adds that according to Rosenberg, the experts had failed to discover such a method. Wow, okay. The man who wrote memoirs was embittered over the Arab defeats of 1948 and 1967 and his own marginalization within Palestinian Arab politics. The important point, right? Because this guy was very diminished at that point. You know, it's not like someone. So but anyway,
a lot of people did not ride with him.
Yeah, but bear with me because this
this is
article,
good. This is good stuff. This is good stuff. We gotta lay it out because I feel like this is an example of a guy who in a confrontation with Zionism eventually became a sort of insane anti-Semite and gave in to the protocols shit and became just devolved into a 4chan they control everything kind of guy and this is a cautionary tale,
many such cases
cautionary
definitely.
tale.
So he was both defensive and defiant about his wartime support of and service to Nazi Germany. Even so, memoirs demonstrates with verifiable detail that, at least from the time he settled in Berlin, he admired Himmler in particular and Nazism in general, shared or came to share Himmler's hatred and fear of Jews, and did everything in his power to promote the Axis cause among Arabs and Muslims. That his efforts produced little of military or geopolitical consequence was not due to any lack of zeal on his part. So,
right.
The narrative, so this is where this author kind of having presented all of that, he starts to talk about how Husseini has been portrayed historically. The narrative in question here, however, presents Husseini not simply as a supporter and agent of Nazi Germany, but as an instigator or driving spirit behind the Nazi extermination of European Jewry, a close friend of Adolf Eichmann, and an exacting inspector of death camp operations. Many of its more recent iterations link Husseini's allegedly instrumental role in the Holocaust to claims about Arabs or Muslims more widely. Because the story of the development of this narrative has not been fully told, and because the use to which it is being employed bears upon the core ethics of Holocaust historiography, I trace it here with as much precision as possible. Its primary source was SS Colonel Dieter Wisklensky. Do you know him? I've never heard of him before outside of this context.
SS General?
SS Colonel
SS
Dieter
Colonel
Wislekenki, who had been Eichmann's superior, rival, and subordinate. Wislekenki.
How do you spell
Wisliceny.
CENY?
Yeah, Wisliceny.
Oh yeah. It almost looks like a Polish type name.
It does, yeah. I was wondering.
It'd be like Visliceny or something. Visliceny. Or
Yeah.
something. The Lord of the Manor, East Prussia, so that makes sense.
He played an important role in the deportation of Slovakian Jewry and headed the Special Command for Jewish Affairs in Greece in 1943, which organized the ghettoization of Jews in advance of their deportation to death camps at Auschwitz and Treblinka. He also became known for extracting funds from Jewish communities in exchange for his promises to end or slow the deportation process in Eastern Europe. After Germany surrendered, he was arrested in Austria on suspicion of war crimes. He testified for the prosecution at Nuremberg, providing the major expose of Eichmann's role in the Holocaust. He also produced extensive accounts before, during, and after his January 3rd, 1946 testimony before the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, but with 3 exceptions discussed below, made no mention of Husseini playing an important role in the Nazi genocide. In 1946, Israel Rudolf Katzner and Andrei Steiner, 2 Zionist activists who had dedicated themselves to rescuing Jews of wartime Hungary and Slovakia from deportation, submitted affidavits to Nuremberg war crimes investigators. Kastner's affidavit, hereafter referred to as KW for Kastner Wisleceny, stated that during World War II, Wisleceny told him that Eichmann had declared that, in deference to Husseini, German officials would not allow Jews to depart for Palestine, at least openly, a claim that aligns well with Husseini's well-established protest against any Jewish immigration to Palestine. The affidavit then turned sensational. Wislaseni is quoted as having told Kastner that, according to my opinion, the Grand Mufti, who has been in Berlin since 1941, played a role in the decision of the German government to exterminate the European Jews, the importance of which must not be disregarded. He had repeatedly suggested to the various authorities with whom he has been in contact, above all before Hitler, Ribbentrop, and Himmler, the extermination of European Jewry. He considered this as a comfortable solution to the Palestine problem. In his messages broadcast from Berlin, he surpassed us all in anti-Jewish attacks. He was one of Eichmann's best friends and has constantly incited him to accelerate the extermination measures. I heard say that, accompanied by Eichmann, he has visited incognito the gas chamber at Auschwitz. The Steiner-Wislaseni affidavit, hereafter SW, presents a nearly identical scenario. The Mufti was a bitter archenemy of the Jews and had always been the protagonist of the idea of their annihilation, Steiner recalls Wislaseni telling him. According to Steiner, Wislaseni then stated, the Mufti was also one of the initiators of the systemic extermination of European Jewry by the Germans and had been the permanent collaborator and advisor of Eichmann and Himmler in the execution of the plans. Wislaseni would later be shown the Steiner affidavit and would sign it, attesting that, with some minor exceptions, it accurately reflected what he had told Steiner during the war. In addition to his passive acceptance of the reconstruction of these reported wartime conversations, Wislaseni would write in a statement in July 1946, recounting a conversation that he claimed to have had with Eichmann in January 1942. In the course of that conversation, Eichmann purportedly told Wislaseni that Husseini had visited him in Eichmann's office suite in Berlin, and that he had taken Husseini into his special Kartenzimmer, map room or card room, and proceeded to lay out for him the plans for the destruction of European Jewry. KW, SW, and map room were soon followed by Simon Weissenthal's 1947 unsourced allegation that Husseini had inspected Auschwitz and Majdanek in the company of Eichmann, observed the crematoria operations, and singled out the hardest workers for praise. After the war, an early version of the accusations against Husseini, based on Kastner and Wislaseni affidavits, featured in a March 1946 article in The Nation by Eliyahu Epstein, later Elath. Interesting. I guess they changed their last name to Elath, or I don't know. Okay. In 1947, the widely syndicated journalist Drew Pearson published a graphic version of the Husseini story, tied Husseini's alleged extermination program to the Muslims and Arabs more generally, and used it to denounce the Arab position at post-war deliberations over Palestine. The same year, the Jewish agency activist Maurice Perlman published a much longer and more detailed version of the story, which large parts of the two affidavits quoted verbatim. Perlman's account appears in a chapter titled Perish Judea from his book Mufti of Jerusalem. Perish Judea types of accounts were also sent by the Jewish Agency's Jerusalem office of the British Foreign Ministry and circulated within American Zionist circles led by Rabbi Abba Hillel Silver. A particularly vivid version featured in Behind the Silken Curtain by Bartley Crum, a supporter of the American Christian Palestine Committee and a Truman appointee to the Anglo-American Joint Commission of Inquiry on Palestine. In what follows, I use the term Perish Judea to refer to portrayals of Husseini as originator, architect, or driving spirit of the Holocaust that are based on KW, SW, and map room. The three sources for this narrative raise a number of questions. Kastner never explained or defended the allegations in KW, and he ignored them completely within the dozens of other reports, affidavits, and testimonies he authored in his dealings with Eichmann, Wislaseni, and other Nazi officials, including a comprehensive 300-page report he drafted on behalf of the Budapest Rescue Group, and presented to the World Jewish Congress in 1946. Andrei Steiner maintained a decades-long public silence on his experiences with the Bratislava Rescue Group and the interactions he had with Wislaseni and other Nazi officials. And although Husseini's opposition to Jewish emigration to Palestine during the war was well known, none of those presenting Husseini as Holocaust architect offered any evidence at the time, and none has been brought forward since that he objected to or interfered with proposals or active programs to bring Jews to safety into areas outside of the Middle East, such as Switzerland, Sweden, Spain, Portugal, Japan, China, or the Western Hemisphere. I have drawn on archival sources, primarily those of the Central Zionist Archive in Jerusalem, in putting together the following account of the conditions under which the Perish Judea narrative was produced and disseminated. The lead role was played by Gideon Rufer, Raphael, an operative with the Jewish Agency in Palestine, who would go on to become an Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom and a director general of the Israeli Foreign Office. Rufer worked closely with Bedřich Friedrich Steiner, a former colleague of Andrei Steiner within the wartime Bratislava Jewish Rescue Group, who had started a war crimes documentation effort in Bratislava in the aftermath of Germany's defeat. Those who worked with Rufer and Bedřich, what is the little caret, the inverted caret over the R? How is that pronounced? Bedřich? But anyway,
in German?
yeah, I guess it's German. Might be, some other Eastern European language. But yeah, I have no idea how to pronounce that character. But
Yeah,
anyway,
over an
so
R.
I'm just going to pronounce it like a normal R. Bedřich Steiner on war crimes documentation operations included the above-mentioned Moshe Perlman, who would go on to become an Israeli military spokesman and chief of Israel's broadcasting service, and Eliyahu Epstein, chief of the Jewish... I assume that they changed their last name to Elath because, kind of like Netanyahu, chief of the Jewish Agency's Arab Department and a future Israeli ambassador to the United States. Other major figures were Teddy Kollek, future head of the Office of Israel's Prime Minister and later Mayor of Jerusalem, and Arthur Peer, Asher Ben Natan, future Director General of Israel's Ministry of Defense. In their war crimes documentation activities, they also cooperated with Tuvia Friedman, a Polish Holocaust survivor who began his own documentation effort in Vienna, and warily with Simon Wiesenthal, who had set up a war crimes documentation operation in Linz, Austria, and whom they view with suspicion as a supporter of their rivals, the revisionist Zionists, founded by Vladimir Jabotinsky and led by future Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. On
Because you hear about him a lot as he's just like a cool guy who just went around and captured Nazis. But
epic.
I think that there was some interesting layers to him and which faction kind of. Anyways, interesting.
So on February 6th, Andrei Steiner drew up SW and had it signed by several Bratislava colleagues in the presence of a notary. He then sent it to Rufer, who forwarded copies to Moshe Shertak, director of the political department of the Jewish Agency. Rufer, Peer, and the Jewish Agency's Jerusalem office were soon cabling scoops of the story and the facsimiles of SW and KW to Jewish Agency offices in Europe and New York, to sympathetic journalists in Europe and North America, to European and American government agencies, and to Allied war court offices. I beg to submit to you the following information concerning the activities of the Mufti of Jerusalem during his stay in Germany, wrote Peer to Bartley Crum as early as February 17th. From most reliable friends, I received affidavits which contain information about the Mufti's connection with the notorious Eichmann, head of the Gestapo Jewish Department. The source of this information is Hauptsturmführer SS Dieter V. Wislasensky, deputy of Eichmann. Their reliable friends would likely have been Katzner and Andrei Steiner. Peer added that, according to Wislaseny, the Mufti was the driving spirit behind the mass extermination of the Jews and had returned from a visit to Auschwitz, Konzentrationslager.
Okay.
These German words. Yep. Very much impressed about the German, I guess it's, concentration camp.
Concentration.
Very impressed about the German efficiency to solve the Jewish problem. Wislaseny, however, had not yet signaled his agreement to these allegations by signing SW. On March 5th, Rufer obtained permission from American authorities to carry out his own private interrogation of Wislaseny, in the course of which he obtained Wisłaseny's signature on SW. He then cabled Moshe Shertak, referring to Wislaseny as Willie and to Husseini as Newman. Steiner affidavit concerning Newman, sent recently by myself, have interrogated at Nuremberg source Willie, who fully endorsed affidavit, signing German copy, quote, have read this affidavit, is content correct, unquote, will forward original, first opportunity, stop. The next day, Rufer reported to a colleague in London on his group's success in using the affidavit to influence Parliament. You certainly remember the interpellation in Parliament last week, where it was mentioned that evidence about the Mufti's role as instigator for the extermination of the Jews in Europe is available in Nuremberg, he wrote. Well, the basis for this interpellation was the information which Wislaseny gave during the war to our friends in Bratislava and Budapest. I requested our friends to make out affidavits and considered it essential to get to the contents of this affidavits, confirmed by Wislaseny himself. Rufer's team kept track of newspaper articles reflecting successful interpellations in both Parliament and the American Congress. Andrei Steiner was in the dark on the latest developments. In April, Rufer responded to an earlier memo from Steiner titled Angelegenheit v. Newman, the Wisłaseny-Husseini matter, in which Steiner asked if it was true that someone had managed to carry out a personal interrogation of Wislaseny. The man who interrogated Wislaseny at Nuremberg was myself. Rufer replied, you can imagine it was a strange feeling to be confronted with the man who had helped to do so much evil. In the same letter, Rufer broached 5 critical issues: the hunt for Eichmann, the circumstances of which Husseini's signature on SW, the impending transfer of Husseini from American custody to Nuremberg to Czechoslovakian custody, his impending war crimes trial in Bratislava, and his personal condition. I got from him Husseini very interesting information on the probable holding place from Eichmann, which we just now are checking up. Furthermore, he signed the German translation of your affidavit regarding Husseini and confirmed the contents are true with the exception that Eichmann was not born in Palestine.
What?
What? I guess something in the affidavit said that. You understand how important the signature is for us. Now, I would like to know from you details about the Czechoslovakian extradition request when he actually will be transferred to your country. It would be valuable if W would reaffirm the matter of Newman at his trial, but it is nowhere worthwhile to urge for it. By the way, W was very pleased to hear that you are all well. He has lost his belly and looks rather shabby. I must say he is a highly intelligent criminal and certainly will fight for his life with much skill. The situation in Bratislava, where Bedřich Steiner's group had strong influence with the War Crimes Court, an influence of which Husseini was certainly aware, puts into perspective Rufier's comment on Husseini's cunning intelligence and determination to survive. The activists reporting to lawfare had persuaded American and Czechoslovakian officials to grant them access to Husseini, whom they visited in prison repeatedly and from whom they coaxed numerous written and oral statements either directly or by passing on questions through the prosecution teams. Concerned that the Americans would release Husseini, they worked to have him moved from American and Czechoslovakian custody. Later, fearful that he would be executed in Czechoslovakia before he could provide them with information or testimony regarding Eichmann or Husseini, they appealed to the Americans to reassume custody. It is likely that Husseini would have heard or been apprised that Rudolf Katzner was testifying on behalf of other Nazi officials, including Hans Becker and Hermann Krumie, who worked with Eichmann and were implicated in the Nazi extermination program, and who had escaped prosecution in large part as a result of Katzner's intervention. As a desperate and crafty criminal, Husseini would likely have gathered or attempted to infer what kinds of information the Zionist activists might find of interest.
Wow.
Only
So
10...
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I see what's going on here a little bit.
Yeah. Only 10 weeks after Rufer sent his letter to Bedřich Steiner, Husseini wrote out his 4-page map room statement and handed it personally to the Jewish Agency activists during another visit from them to his prison cell. The map room begins with Husseini relating that Husseini had visited Eichmann at Eichmann's office in late 1941 and early 1942. By chance, I was with Eichmann in Berlin a few days later when he told me in detail about this visit. Eichmann lectured to the Grand Mufti in his map room, where he had collected statistical accounts of the Jewish population of various European countries. He lectured in detail about the solution of the Jewish question in Europe. The Grand Mufti, according to him, Eichmann, was most impressed and said to Eichmann that he already asked Himmler and had in fact secured Himmler's consent to the point that a representative of Eichmann should come to Jerusalem as his personal advisor when he, the Grand Mufti, would go back after the victory of the Axis powers. Husseini adds that Eichmann offered him the position of special advisor to Husseini, but that he refused the offer. He then proceeds to present himself as a dedicated opponent to the killings of Jews, whose effort to support mass immigration from Reich-controlled Europe was thwarted, ultimately, by Husseini.
Wow. Yeah, so here's a guy saying that he didn't even do the Holocaust. It was Husseini. It was all Husseini. I tried to be Oscar Schindler,
yes.
But this damn Husseini, who conveniently, you could deduce that these Jewish agency activists, I guess they were just getting appointments to go talk to him. It's not even clear how. I guess you could go talk to.
Yeah.
He's in jail, I guess.
Yeah.
So you could go talk to him. No, and all this is happening basically in what, because he was executed in Czechoslovakia ultimately in 1946. So this is all happening right after World War II, before the establishment of Israel, right?
Yeah.
So you could see the potency for the Zionists in the context of Palestine of tying the Grand Mufti to the Nazis and their war crimes, the extreme potency of that. Also, it's just worth mentioning that they referenced there that, when he was in Berlin, but I think it also we should keep in mind that due to the Arab revolt that started in 1936, the Grand Mufti had to flee. Al-Husseini fled Palestine and didn't return, I think, until after World War II. So during the entire World War II period, he was floating around Europe and eventually I think was staying between Italy under Mussolini and Nazi Germany. And I think he also was in Iraq for a while because there was an arrest warrant out for him in the British Mandate in Palestine, right? So
Yeah.
he's like this expat guy. So that just kind of underscores the sort of like, it's like who's like Juan Guaido, like you remember him in Venezuela, who's like,
Yeah.
I'm the president of like Venezuela. I'm not saying it was like on that level of a joke, but this is a guy who's like not on the ground actually in
Yeah.
Palestine and is like kind of just like ends up
Yeah, he was the
being
one who like
taken in.
Elon was like, constantly like retweeting and be like the rightful president or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. This guy is like a
Right.
quisling in exile. It's like all the exile
It's like the
governments in
MEK
London.
people in
Yeah,
Iran or
yeah.
the Shah, Reza Pahlavi. Yeah.
And clearly then
Um,
he makes this deal with like the devil to basically become their little like they're kind of like their little propaganda guy to like basically try to rile up, a little bit echoing World War I, like a jihad made in Germany kind of vibe of like, oh
yeah.
wait, maybe we can get the mufti to give like radio addresses and like basically, I think that's why like he did go to like, Sarajevo because it was under Nazi control,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
like
They
was
still
pretty
had
much
that
in the
idea.
Axis. He was
Yeah.
like hiding out in the Axis territories for all of World War II as
Yeah, based on
an
what they
exile.
said about him and the way they talked about him, it seemed like they still very much did have that jihad made in Germany like idea that like he could like rally up all the Muslims. I mean, yeah, like a lot of what you're saying, like this is a like just this paragraph like that comes after that in this article like really kind of sums up it like he writes it would be anachronistic to hold the Jewish agency activists led by Rufer and the former Zionist rescue workers of Budapest and Bratislava to the standards of historiographical representation that should apply to the later versions of the Newman story. Newman, that is Husseini, right?
Mhm.
These men were not acting as historians, but as activists working in a war-torn Europe and in the wake of a catastrophe that had not yet been conceptualized as the Holocaust. Rufer and Peer teamed up with other Jewish agency operatives who had been dispatched to post-war Europe to coordinate illegal immigration, referred to on the European end as Briha and the Palestinian end as Aliyah Bet.
Oh, the Burqa network, remember?
Yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah.
talked about that in Contra 8.
Um, War crime documentation, and in some cases, arms smuggling. They loathed Husseini as a Nazi collaborator and viewed his possible return to leadership in Palestine as a threat. They lamented the Allied preoccupation with the emerging Cold War that was eclipsing interest in pursuing Nazi criminals. As experienced covert operatives with strong connections to American and European intelligence services, they were no doubt aware that the Western and Soviet bloc governments, as well as governments in the Middle East and Latin America, were competing with one another to find and employ former Nazis and Nazi collaborators who could be useful in intelligence gathering, propaganda efforts, and chemical, biological, nuclear, and missile technology. However, they would not
True.
likely have known or imagined the full extent of the various programs to recruit war criminals, cleanse their records, and put them to work for their new sponsors.
Hmm.
They saw their only chance of having Husseini arrested and prosecuted lay in making the case that he had played a critical role in the conception, planning, organization, and execution of the extermination policy. They lacked a nation state to give them a voice in the investigation and prosecution of war criminals, and had been frustrated in their attempt to convince war crimes courts to appoint a Jewish advisor to bring more legal and prosecutorial attention to the Nazi Judeo-side.
Hmm.
Finally, they were also in the midst of an intensive public relations effort on behalf of the establishment of a Jewish state in the British Mandate Palestine, and in opposition to Arab lobbyists like Samir Shamai, who argued the destruction of European Jewry was committed by European powers, and that it was Europe that should make a place for the survivors or grant them a state on its territory, not
Hmm.
the Palestinians. For all these reasons, they prioritized their war crime documentation efforts on the hunt for Eichmann, the manager of extermination policy, and on the case against Husseini, even as they attempted to tie Husseini to Eichmann. So yeah, basically, like you can kind of see, like that's the thing. Like I kind of like, I guess maybe this was naive of me, but I almost sort of thought that all this like fixation on the Mufti was retroactive. I never really thought about like who was the first person to like, say that. Like
Start
obviously it does
using
have some
this.
yeah, some
Yeah,
basis
yeah.
in historical fact. Who was the first person to like blame the Palestinian for the Holocaust? Like I never asked myself that weirdly, you know? But I did kind of assume that it
Yeah.
was more recent and it was more like,
Something the
or
state
it
of
was kind of
Israel
like
kind of came up with like in
yeah,
the like 90s or
more
something.
yeah, exactly. Like once the anti-Zionist movement started to kind of catch on in the United States, or even like in the internet era, or like a
Yeah,
little bit more,
post
yeah,
nine
like in the
eleven
90s. Like
era
I
kind of
wouldn't have
thing.
been so like that kind of almost did like reflexively think that it was a more recent thing, but no, in a way, like it actually was like immediately they were like, how can we blame the Arabs for this? So that,
Yeah, they
again, like
jumped
as he
on it.
notes, there were other factors like we want to prosecute this guy for like everything that he did do wrong. we got to make a strong case that he's like to blame for the Holocaust, because like otherwise they might not prosecute him at all, which on that level it's fair enough.
Fair
But
enough. Yeah.
also like, you
But
know,
like, and I get
this,
that, like, okay, if we have to exaggerate it, look, he's a bad guy. We know he's a bad guy. So like, if we have to exaggerate his, his
yeah,
role in this whole thing to get him like included on the dock, with everybody else as
yes,
like a main player, then fuck it, let's do it. And then on top of that, we can doubly like weaponize that to be like, well, he was a chief organizer of this thing, and he was the leader of, because like look at his speeches when he said, like, because he would claim obviously to be like, I'm the leader of like all the you know what I mean, like
yeah,
I'm the
exactly,
leader of the
yeah,
Palestinian people, and it's like guy in exile saying that, and
yeah,
and who was not able to like I think we'll probably like investigate a little more, like what forces on the ground were actually sort of like quote unquote in charge, but like and to what extent they were like split from him. But he certainly, I do not think, was in any direct control of like other groups, though he may have claimed to be, and
no, yeah.
probably
I mean,
exaggerated his influence.
as this guy mentioned, like it really amounted almost to nothing. Like it wasn't like very effective. Like his
It sounds like
propaganda
the guy
efforts.
like
Yeah.
completely like annihilated his own reputation and like actually like not to.
Yeah, you would think like if all like Muslims and Arabs are such big Nazis, and they would like continue to revere and love him instead of like completely marginalizing him. If that were true, then in his memoirs that were written in Arabic and serialized in Arabic periodicals, then probably he wouldn't have been like so like remorseful over siding with the Nazis and like trying to kind of like, cover it up and things like that,
Yeah,
you
just
know.
purely on like a kind of like geopolitical or strategic level was like a absolute disaster. Like
Yeah.
and he kind of like walked right into I wouldn't even call it a trap, but like he took that wrong turn, and then they were able to like, even though like he strikes me as more of like, yeah, this kind of like quisling propagandist, like exiled politician. Also to like enhance his own like power, like with the Nazis, he would like exaggerate his leadership of like all the Arabs, and how much everybody, how much of a credible leader he is, and probably hoping he'd be installed, right? Like, and go
Yeah.
back to Palestine after the war. I guess that was his expectation, but then had to like debase himself into being like kind of subordinating himself to being a kind of like a Nazi puppet, like a media puppet, which was mostly ineffective. Like it was sort of like this thing happening in a vacuum, but then this fucking Nazi trying to save his own skin, it spins a story about how like he didn't like do the Holocaust with Eichmann. It was actually like
Yeah.
the guy you guys hate, like, and think
Yeah.
is a piece of shit. Like actually, it was him, and
And the
like
guy who you
he
definitely need evidence against, yeah, like, and to like, and also, wasn't Eichmann born in Palestine? He's like, I'm not saying that, like, that's too ridiculous. Like,
I'm not sure
everything
what
else,
that
yeah,
was. Yeah.
100% true, yeah.
Strange.
Yeah,
Yeah, but this like I looked up a picture of this guy, Visliceni or whatever.
yeah,
He looks like a total sicko. He's got that Hauptsturmführer fucking just gross like vibe to him. And he was dead like a year later. I mean,
yeah. He's
they
like that,
killed him,
like
didn't
fat
save
little
him.
Nazi stormtrooper
He is
look
like
that you
he's
always
like the
see.
"Are
Yeah,
we the baddies" looking ass motherfucker. Like, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like
yeah. He
it's
really,
he really
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Um so I mean, is the final conclusion of that article that he did say this? These Nazis did say it, but it was likely
Oh, well, I mean, he signed it. He said that it happened. They go through like the trials and everything.
but they
Um,
could not produce any evidence that like, or no evidence has been
Other than
turned up
that,
subsequently, but then them
yeah,
just saying this happened, I saw it. Like it basically like they told a couple very spicy stories about like he went in the map room and he told them about he's gonna kill everybody, and he was like, yeah, and then he's like, can I go to like Auschwitz, and it was like, yeah, and then like he went like personally inspected all the content, like I
yeah.
mean,
The whole,
the guy was a Nazi, so like I mean, like maybe he did. It still doesn't mean he was like the leader of like all the Arab people, or that they ought to be held responsible for like the actions of this guy that like decided basically to ally with the Axis and like endorsed their kind of like worldview and then tried to like get something political out of it, and it all like disastrously failed, and most people like in Palestine didn't follow him or
Yeah,
like
this
consider him as leader. Nor did they like he lived until the 70s. I think he died in Beirut, but he was like not he tried to have like political parties and stuff after the war and like start resistance, groups and stuff like that, and most people like just didn't fuck with him, right?
yeah.
Like he was
This
pretty much
article
a
definitely like falls on the side that like I mean the whole thing is built on that guy like with Hosseini's like that's what this whole thing like is built on. That's like the only testimony that they have. He
right.
talks about it like later, and he goes through like kind of like a longer history of the whole thing. But he writes here like no written Holocaust order from Hitler has been found, and he may not have issued one. Direct written or oral communication regarding the extermination program was discouraged, and a language of euphemism was used to keep the operations hidden from the outside world and from targeted Jewish populations. Historically accepted as well as the fervid ethno-nationalist character of Nazi Germany, which resulted in few non-ethnic Germans being privy to sensitive state matters. The new Parish Judea literature, by contrast, presents Husseini, an Arab fugitive with no state, no army, or organized constituency, as intervening in high Nazi circles, persuading or helping persuade Hitler to commit to the policy of extermination, receiving Himmler's promise for a special advisor from Eichmann's staff, receiving and approving lectures from Eichmann on the details of the final solution, actually instructing Eichmann on how to carry out the policy,
Yeah.
and with or without his green turban or with or without his coterie, not only visiting Nazi camps, but entering into their most sensitive and highly guarded areas or even singling out the best crematoria workers for praise. In regard to ethical standards and taking testimony from witnesses and survivors, no significant testimony from survivors or from witnesses other than Husseini has been cited in support of the core Parish Judea narrative. Overall, the post-1993 Parish Judea literature published in the United States has been marked by a progressive increase in the certitude with which the narrative is presented. So we're not totally wrong about like this all taking hold kind of in the 90s. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah. Well, especially there's a
we
lot more like Holocaust discourse in the 90s. There were a lot of Hollywood
yeah,
movie. I feel like it reached more of a prominence like in culture
yeah,
around then for a lot of reasons, but then
yeah,
was kind of like then that became a reference point to then more people were like Holocaust aware. So then you'd be like, and did you know this Arab guy was totally the leader of every single Muslim in every single Arab in Palestine. Like he
yeah.
basically did. He designed the whole Holocaust. Like he basically, but I like that so far. I mean, we'll reveal a little more. I think we'll probably circle back and do a little more like Mufti biography. But I don't know. It's interesting that like those generals don't bring up like he did go to Sarajevo to sort of like bless like a Bosniak detachment of like basically like SS troops, right? And be like you and give that speech and everything like that. And like in a way, like, oh, that's pretty fucking bad. But like they're kind of all their stories are like, it's like, sometimes these like conspiracy theory people that it's like it's just a little bit too wild that it's like, and then he did this, and then he did that. It's like if they just wanted to say like, oh, he was kind of involved, like, there were kind of like more real examples, but it has to be like, he visited the concentration camps like regularly,
Yeah, in
like
his
dressed
green
up in his
turban.
Muslim
Yeah.
outfit. Like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
exactly.
blessing. In fact, like, I
Yeah.
mean, that's the thing. Like he was like with the Ustasha who were like Catholic, priestly robe wearing, like blood drinking fucking like Satanists who were like doing mass murder rituals. But just I think there's a little selectivity going on with this lying Nazi general, where it comes off a
I
little bit too,
I definitely think so. And it's even like the certitude of it, as he says, has gotten like even more extreme. And also like the prestige of the presses that talk about it has like, more and more like credible people like start saying these things. Basically, what this guy ends up arguing is that like this is almost a form of Holocaust denial because like the distortions that are happening are so outrageous at a certain point.
it's almost like the Nazis didn't do it. They all got just like
Exactly.
tricked by
Which
this
is more or
Muslim. Like
less like what Netanyahu has like come to the point of saying that
it's
like
almost a low key
kind of yeah.
given the alliance between Germany and like Israel, today that we've all seen, like it's kind of dark and like gross to like it almost implies like we know you Germans like are actually civilized, like good people, and like you just got a little carried away. We know it
I
was
almost
that
feel like
Muslim that like
exactly
tricked
that.
you, kind of
It
thing. It's
was
like we know the Holocaust wasn't really your fault. Like as long as you let us punish the true culprits, like every single Arab in Palestine, to letting them off the hook a little bit.
I mean, like it was like a year ago at this point, but I want to say like after October 7th, there were people like saying like high up Israeli officials or spokespeople said almost exactly that, right? That like the Nazis like were bad, but they weren't as bad as the Palestinians. Things like
Right.
like
A sentence I hate, like the least favorite sentence probably in the English language is like, look, the Nazis were bad, but they weren't as bad as like whatever that answer is going to be some fucked up shit. Whether it's like not as bad as the Soviets or not as bad as like the Grand Mufti who tricked them, like, or the British, as Martyr Maid would say, like Winston Churchill himself, who does suck, but it's always going to be bad.
What Hamas
but they were saying that after
worse than what the Nazis did, said the Israeli government minister Nir Barkat.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
They said October 7th was worse than what the Nazis did.
It's important to note the idea that Nazi killers were generally reluctant, morally committed, or somehow internally ashamed of their actions is ahistorical and dangerous. Yeah, but I did see a bunch of versions of that. Yeah, I'm just reading his article, like trying to recount all the times that idea was perpetuated after October 7th, that like the Nazis like, oh, they didn't want to. But like the Palestinians, they relish it. They have delight in like committing this horrible, evil or whatever.
I mean, not in Croatia and Ukraine. They didn't. They loved it. They relished it. Yeah. So plenty of Nazis fucking relished it. Like, come on.
Yes, but I guess the idea is that only Palestinians
and like they
truly
did
relish
it. They
killing and
killed
Nazis
millions of people. And I don't care how much they
reluctant.
liked it or not. Like they killed millions and millions of people.
Yeah, I mean that kind of should be an indication of like, like that should be kind of the metric of like relish.
Yeah.
Like, to the extent to which you actually did it. Like not like kind of like emotive, like other emotive signals or whatever, like whether you said Allahu Akbar or something, like, which I guess is probably the gauge they're using. Yeah, it's stupid, but
I mean, does filming yourself on TikTok while you're like DJing Go a Psytrance while like a building in Gaza like blows up in the background, does that count as like relish?
No.
Okay.
They're the most moral military in the world, and they hate what they have to do.
I'm describing a literal video I saw. Yeah.
I saw like the most psycho. I mean, it's painful to just like talk about like the things that you have to like see just on the internet, like related to all of this, but like I saw like the worst like influencer TikTok the other day talking about like the beeper attack.
Mm-hmm.
It was like some Israeli like influencer woman like sitting in her car going like Hezbollah boom boom, beep beep, like oh like sorry, like your fingers were blown off or like what, and I'm like just shut up. Just shut up.
I'm getting so mad just listening to this. I know I can picture it. Like I could picture that comedian influencer like wearing like a putting a towel around her head, like like oh my god,
like
just the most racist shit.
She wasn't doing it like she wasn't like doing what I remember when they like there were those like sort of like fake like Palestinian nurse videos like that were like like please save us from Hamas, I am Palestinian, like Hamas is attacking or like whatever. That was also really shameless.
But I mean, so we jumped ahead a little bit, but I think that's actually good to kind of like get out of the way.
Yeah, my justification was like a little bit meta historical, something to bear in mind, like, and I feel like
we have to address it.
If it becomes necessary, we can check back in with like the Mufti on our journey, but I think it frees us a little bit to you said, talk about like the other factors and get away from like the Mufti centric historiography.
It's true. Yeah, like he matters somewhat in things like the riot, like the Wailing Wall riots in 29, and obviously the Arab Revolt, and in I think 36 or 37, he does have to like flee Palestine, but like there are a lot of other factions that start to like rise up, including that erstwhile family that hates him, that is like constantly trying to unrun him. Maybe they were right, and then like Al-Qassam, whose name I think we recognize today, right? It's like the namesake of the Al-Qassam brigades, who was much more militant and kind of saw al-Husseini as like a weak collaborator. Well, he's killed by the British.
Talk about like Izzeldin Abdulkader Al-Qassam, but I mean,
I think those become the groups that are like there that start to like engage in like resistance against the British and the Zionists. I mean, what we see is like basically a more like militant posture as like the 20s go into the 30s, and as like European immigration increases and all these land transfers like this, they're obviously like buying up more and more of the land, doing the shady law interpretation kind of
Mhm.
thing. And there's like there's basically more like radical armed factions that aren't as down as al-Husseini are, with like as the Mufti is, with like trying to work something out. They start to see the British as straight up like the enemy who we need to like get out because they're clearly on the Zionists' side. And then, the whole Arab revolt thing. I mean, we're a little out of time today. I guess maybe next time we can talk about. I think the Wailing Wall riots are actually that they're a fascinating kind of like
Yeah.
case study in like the nascent conflict that I was reading about it in the Mufti book. It
Yeah.
is like it's more because I've heard that. I mean, like David Simon himself was like
Yeah.
29, like
Yeah, 20, 21, 29, right? That was what he brought up, right? Or yeah, I think so.
I think did we talk about 21 that the riot that we talked about that resulted in Al Husseini,
That was
or was that the
20. 21
20?
was a bit, yeah, bigger. Yeah, that was April 4th, 1920. We
Okay,
haven't quite
okay.
gotten to
We didn't
21
really
yet.
get to
Yeah.
21. I mean,
Yeah.
21, I mean, it's still
It's
early in the occupation.
interesting.
It's interesting. Maybe we could just like
Yeah.
we could probably maybe talk about those like just as like two discrete events, and get that out of the way because everyone loves talking about them. But the
Yeah.
Wailing Wall thing is like it gets into this issue of like who owns the land, and basically like the Wailing Wall being a sacred thing in Judaism, but then being attached to al-Aqsa, right, and the Dome of the
Mhm.
Rock, and this like fear of, because it was happening in other sectors of Palestine, that just as it like European Jewish immigrants were buying up a lot of land, that if they kind of allowed them, which they had done for centuries, to like worship at the Wailing Wall, and I forget the term for it, but it basically means like bring like religious like accessories and like set them up. Like
Yeah.
I forget, it's like a rare word that, but they were fighting over this about like putting up screens to divide men and women, and like straight up they were afraid that it would become like an open air synagogue, and then somebody would do some legal trickery to be like, we own it now, or like buy it out from them. And so it kind of serves as like a proxy for all of these other things that are happening across the entire society, and these rising anxieties of the Arab population, that somehow they're like, some of these Zionists are scheming to like take land, take this land out from under us, and not make it like quote unquote owned by like the Arab inhabitants of it. And then the escalation from there, and then how it was like weaponized and turned into like the Grand Mufti like sent his killers down there and blah blah
Yeah.
blah. Like it actually kind of escalated. I think it started with a thing where it really was kind of like a localized dispute. I think in
Yes.
1929 that like kind of snowballed because like, and then like people just kind of like didn't back down from like their stance, and then it like grew and grew. But it was like, oh, they sent some cops to like move it because people couldn't walk to their houses. But it happened, I think, to be on like the biggest day of like Yom Kippur or something.
Yeah.
And like
Exactly.
it was like sad, it was like the Sabbath, so like the guys wouldn't like move the screens because they can't do work. And then the police, were like, what the fuck, like move it. And then like ladies started like attacking the guys when they were like moving the screen, and they accidentally like hit a lady, but then it got reported that like cops just showed up and like fucking just started beating elderly people. Like, and then there were like anti-police brutality protests, and then like it just started like, and the newspapers picked it up and were like, this is what Muslims are doing on Yom Kippur, blah blah blah. And like, you could see these. There's a lot of
No,
different
yeah,
dynamics
definitely the
going on.
Wailing Wall riots are like worth talking about for
And
sure.
it's still obviously
Um,
contested to this day. Like it's,
yeah.
when you see people going and like praying at the Wailing Wall, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like that is Israeli controlled now, right? Like
Yeah.
the Muslims still have the mosque itself, right? The
Yeah.
Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa, but the wall is like Israelis can get. That's where JD Vance went and like took a picture, like
Yeah,
praying at
and
it.
they all go there. They
Yeah,
all
they
go
all
there.
go there. But that's actually when I was reading about it, I was like, that is it's very loaded that like people just go to the Wailing Wall, and it's kind of like
I mean, it's kind of like a weird like political gesture
because that's the last wall of the temple that some people think is like totally going to get rebuilt, like needs to be rebuilt, and then that's what all the Christian Zionists like want for the rapture to happen or whatever. That's I think definitely what the more like extreme currents, sort of like theocratic currents in Israeli society, I think high key want is to like rebuild like the third temple, right?
Absolutely.
That's where all this ends. That's where all this goes. Like smashing the Dome of the Rock in Al-Aqsa and like building a gigantic like Tel Aviv
realistically
temple,
what I think that they're going to try to do. Yeah, well that's Daniel Pinchback's idea is like to keep the Al-Aqsa but also have like a holographic temple like projected over it. That's like one wacky. What I think like they might try to do is like to take it, like to just airlift the Dome of the Rock and move it so like the mosque like isn't harmed, but it's just not in that place anymore, and like move it somewhere where like anyone can visit it. That's what I could see happening.
Do you think they could lift that with like helicopters?
I feel like
without
they
breaking
have.
it.
Well, I don't like. I'm not saying that this is like a very respectful thing to do or that they should.
No, obviously,
obviously
not.
not.
I'm just wondering, like, is that like, even feasible that you could like detach like a very old mosque from the ground?
Enough that like the like someone like Netanyahu would view that as like an incredibly like kind and generous thing to do.
Yeah, or maybe like disassemble it in parts and then like rebuild it somewhere else or something.
Yeah, in Saudi Arabia. Like literally.
In the Negev.
Although they would end up demolishing it because it would be like shirk to visit it.
Oh yeah, that's true.
No, they're not like that anymore. After they infected the entire Muslim world with like their stupid like Wahhabi ideology, now they're moderate.
No, they have like weird cities for Westerners now that like you can move to that have like a very weird like Mars colony vibe. Yeah, Nome. Yeah,
I mean that's basically like like tons of places in like the entire Gulf is like that. Just like literally like 70% of like the population of like Qatar isn't Qatari, or like same thing with the UAE.
Yeah.
Like,
well, they're gonna have golf courses, and it
and
honestly
you'll be able to visit the Dome of the Rock. Yeah,
it looks like I don't know, like Bakersfield or something. Like it just looks like it's very strange.
Yeah, I was posting about that. Yeah, it seems like the airport. Like it seems like if you lived inside the airport and like you went to go like play on the runway, and like the description of Nome is so like dissonant from like what Nome actually appears to be. Like it was supposed to be like this epic like super mall that like stretched for miles and was like this long, like all these luxury stores, like amazing places, and it's like
crypto city.
Yeah, it seems like almost like a prison. Like there's like
it looks like a military base, like kind of vibe, like a depressing military base. Like
exactly.
I don't know
soon
what
they'll
the deal
have
is.
like features you can go visit, like the Dome of the Rock airlifted from Jerusalem.
Yeah, they need to get like that'll be their sphere. They can throw Dead and Company shows inside of it. And charge $1 million.
Too awful. Too awful.
I know. Sorry. I know that's bad. I mean, no blasphemy. That's just what these sickos would.
That's what they want.
That's what these psytrance sickos would want.
That's basically what Daniel Pinchback
they're not going to stop until they can throw a psytrance festival inside of the dome. You're like,
they won't.
I feel that in my bones that like.
That would be the first. If they like got control over it, that would be like the first thing they did. It would be like a psytrance festival / like celebratory
for
dance.
Peace and unity.
Yeah, a peace festival.
No, we need to have one of those like 3D like Android like psytrance like AI generated like god things. Like they do that at all the shows now. I hate it. It's just like like an AI generated like Android woman, like a Gaia goddess. Like
I've seen some of that where like it's like a skull and then like flowers come out of its head, and it's like a sort of an AI like video thing.
Yeah,
where it's like morphing like into different things, like AI just randomly generating. Like that's so sus. I hate that.
Yeah,
but like I don't like that whole vibe at all. Like honestly, so it's just like just not my scene.
I was ranting about that specifically on Insta the other day, and shout out Techno Legends, Dax J, Lindsay Herbert. I think Lindsay Herbert reposted it, so she clearly agrees. I said there should only be like VHS B-roll of like complex like third world liberation struggles like paired with like techno, not like dancing AI goddess like Gaia robot bugging people. So
I just hate
real
AI
heads
art
know.
in
Real heads
general.
know it sucks. Yeah,
I
AI
hate,
art
I
sucks.
just fundamentally hate AI art. Like, I'm just sick of seeing it. Like, I really think that, like, in the
Disgusting.
future, like, or well, I don't know if this is true because, like, it might be like the sort of man in the high castle reality where, like, we view it as good. But in a good future, we'll look back at the style of AI art and see it the same way that, like, we see, like, Nazi propaganda pictures or, like, that giant, like, bust of Mussolini with, like, the CCC. That's, like,
Yeah,
how we'll
just
see. If the
horrifying.
future is, like, remotely, like, human and good and not, like, an evil hellscape, like, that's how we'll look back at AI art.
There's gonna be a memorial museum to like just filled with those like Facebook posts of like beautiful, and it's like just like like a person with like 10 fingers, like that has the lower body
Yeah.
of like a tank, and like it's like
Yeah,
cradling
exactly. Like, how come no one
babies with
ever
no
shares
eyes.
pictures like this?
Yeah,
Yeah, because they're
exactly.
evil.
Yeah, that feels like an op. Like, who is doing that? Like, who's flooding Facebook in these groups with like the most horrifying, like incoherent pictures of all time on a
And
regular basis, and being like, I
somehow they
love
like
this.
make money
Like,
out of it.
it
Somehow they
must be a
make money out of
content
it.
farm thing.
Yeah.
It's truly dark. Like, it's truly disturbing.
It's evil. It's like Elsagate gone, like
Right.
like, you know, entire society wide.
Elsagate is child's play now that AI is here.
Mascal Elsagate. Yeah, exactly. This is Elsagate for adults, and we all had to participate in it, and it's taking over our entire society. And we all have to talk about how groundbreaking it is. Like, literally, like, the plots of Elsagate were like plots made up. They sound like they were made up by AI. We're always living in an endless Elsagate video.
I think that's it. Yeah, media is all turning into Elsagate content.
Absolutely. And we all had to like pretend that it's groundbreaking. It's like, no, like Elsagate was better than this. Like that's gonna save the world. Honest, I was saying the other day, it's the biggest fraud of all time. And the person I was talking to was like, "Oh, but people said that about the internet." And I'm like, "I don't care. That's a fraud too."
Like, the internet's the internet's not like all worthless, but it's definitely sus. So
sus, and I think it is. Yeah, insofar as it's not worthless, it's different from AI. I think AI is more worthless than the internet. I don't know. Maybe I'm just old and I can't get with the times, but I hate it, and I think it's the biggest fraud of all time. But that's a story for another day.
Reject the fake instant god. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I guess we'll leave it there for now and come back and all right, we'll talk about 21 and 29 so that David Simon can't attack us, and
we'll talk about what the Mufti did.
What the Mufti did,
and now
but we also got to talk about what the Zionists did. Like, in the third, we'll maybe crack into that good book.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to be mooks or anything.
No, so. We don't. We're too Irish to not be mooks, but we'll try. You know, we don't understand.
Does mooks originate as an Irish slur?
No, I think it's kind of a pan. Like, it feels like you could aim it at like kind of any ethnic group. It sounds kind of
like Mick. Like, it sounds like something that you would, but yeah, it's sort of.
It sounds like it could be insulting, like almost any 20th century like American ethnic group, like
I think
in like Brooklyn or something, like or just a general insult. I don't know, but it's not positive. But we will refute his ass and get into that. Maybe we'll get to the Arab revolt.
We're all about refuting.
You know, maybe we'll get to Arab revolting. I mean, we're actually, we're moving along. We're moving along. We're going to be mostly in the 30s
substantive content thus far. Like, we're not. Wow, one of the like possible etymologies of the term mook is that it's a corruption of the Italian Mameluco, which is Mamluk from the Arabic.
Oh, that's where Mameluke comes from. Like, Italians always, hey, you Mameluke. Like, it's like, oh, I'm Mamluk.
That's crazy.
Wow. Crypto Arab influence revealed once again. First with the Irish, now with the Italians.
That's one of the possible etymologies anyway.
Interesting. Kind of makes sense. It sounds like, I think it's a very Sicilian thing to say. Could be wrong, but I don't know. But we'll leave it there for now. But until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.
Bye.